I remember a time, about 4 years ago, when my family moved to a rural property. It was not a place we owned outright, but rather a temporary arrangement, a kind of trial stay offered by a woman who was trying to sell the land. She called it a demonstration, a chance for us to experience life there before making a full commitment. Because of this unique situation, we did not have access to the main house. Instead, our home became a large wooden storage shed, a place not meant for living, but where we tried to make ourselves comfortable. From the very first moment we arrived, a profound sense of unease settled over me. It felt as though invisible eyes were constantly watching, observing my every move, even when no one else was near. This feeling, a persistent prickle on my skin, never truly left me during our time there. The farm itself was a peculiar layout, sprawling and somewhat desolate. The main entrance was marked by a manual barbed wire gate, which we had to unfasten and swing open each time we came and went. Beyond this gate, an expansive, empty field stretched out before us, vast and open under the sky. To the right, standing somewhat isolated in this field, was one of those old-fashioned outdoor washrooms, a small, solitary structure. Moving past that, a cluster of small trees stood huddled together, offering a brief respite from the open land. It was just beyond these trees that our humble wooden storage house stood, a stark contrast to the distant, more substantial structure of the actual farmhouse. To the left, further down the property, was the large, imposing farmhouse itself, a structure that felt both grand and strangely neglected. And beyond the farmhouse, stretching into the unknown, was a thick, dense forest. I particularly remember a specific tree at the edge of the forest, right near what seemed like an old, overgrown pathway. A tattered, faded piece of plastic, perhaps a remnant of a forgotten bag, was tied firmly to one of its lower branches. It had clearly been there for a long time, the plastic bleached by the sun and weathered by the elements. People in this area, I learned, sometimes use such markers for various reasons, perhaps to indicate a trail or a boundary. Directly in front of this marked tree, the ground rose slightly, forming a distinct mound. It looked like someone had deliberately disturbed the earth there, burying something beneath its surface. The sight of it, coupled with the lingering plastic, filled me with a quiet dread, a feeling that something significant and perhaps unsettling lay hidden there. My family included 4 of our own dogs, and we also took care of a dog that already lived on the property. Our daily routine was strict and demanding. We would all wake up before dawn, usually around 5 o'clock in the morning, to begin the long journey into the city. This was necessary for me to attend school and for my parents to get to their respective jobs. That very first night in the storage house, as I prepared for sleep, I made a troubling discovery. My small section of the storage house, which served as my makeshift bedroom, was the only one that did not have a lock on its door. The thought of it, combined with the unnerving sensation that had plagued me since our arrival, made sleep impossible. I lay awake through the entire night, every shadow seeming to lengthen, every creak of the old wood sounding like a deliberate step. I eventually drifted off only when we were on our way to the city, exhausted but still unsettled. As the days turned into a week, things began to escalate, becoming even stranger. The door to my room, which I always ensured was firmly closed, would consistently open during the night. At first, I tried to rationalize it, attributing it to the wind, a common and perhaps cliched explanation for such occurrences. However, the frequency of these incidents and the sheer force with which the door would sometimes swing open made it impossible to ignore. It was far more than a gentle breeze. Then, still within that first week, I witnessed something that stripped away all pretense of rational thought. It was a dark humanoid shape, intensely black, yet it possessed a stark white face. This face was unsettling, seemingly without features beyond empty, hollow sockets where eyes should have been, and an empty, gaping cavity where a mouth would normally be. It stood silhouetted in my doorway, perfectly still, simply staring at me. In that moment, fear paralyzed me. I made a silent vow that I would not sleep a wink as long as I lived in that place. I refused to move, refused to even blink, trying desperately to convince myself that my mind was playing cruel tricks on me, that this was nothing more than a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and apprehension. I simply held its gaze, or what I perceived as its gaze, until it seemed to fade. But some nights later, pretending it was not real became an utterly futile exercise. The dark presence began to move, to act. It would enter my room, slowly, deliberately. Sometimes, I would hear a gentle tapping against the metal window right beside my bed, a soft, rhythmic sound that was deeply unnerving. Other times, I would notice small, everyday objects in my room had been subtly shifted from their original positions. It was a constant, pervasive feeling of being watched, an undeniable presence that lingered in the shadows. Whenever I managed to shine my flashlight directly at it, the figure would immediately vanish, dissipating into nothingness. Yet, the profound, eerie feeling it left behind, that chilling sensation of its recent proximity, never truly went away. I started to rely heavily on a powerful flashlight I kept on my bedside table, ready to snap it on at the slightest provocation. I also began playing music softly throughout the night, a desperate attempt to drown out the silence, to keep myself calm and, most importantly, awake. Despite my best efforts, exhaustion eventually claimed me on some nights. On those mornings, I would awaken with a pounding headache, a deep, internal pressure that felt as though my eyes had been forcibly pushed deeper into my skull. Each awakening was accompanied by a dull, throbbing pain, a constant reminder of the unseen disturbance of the night. My parents, noticing our growing unease and the strange occurrences, eventually decided to install security cameras around the property. This was primarily for a practical reason. While we were in the city, some individuals had been cutting through our forest to access a neighboring farm's lake for fishing. This detail, though seemingly mundane at the time, would later become profoundly significant. Then, one day, my aunt came to visit. She was a woman with a strong belief in unusual superstitions, and she quickly developed a strange conviction that the property contained buried gold. For some unknown reason, this idea took root in her mind. As she explored the forest, she eventually stumbled upon the very mound I had noticed earlier, the one located directly beneath the tree with the tattered plastic marker. Immediately, she decided this was the perfect spot to begin her search for the mythical gold. It was, as I would soon discover, a terrible idea. I joined her in the effort, reluctantly wielding a shovel. I need to describe the sensation of digging that day with as much precision as possible, to convey the unsettling feeling of it. There is a distinct difference in the feel of digging through regular dirt, compared to encountering rocks or wet mud or heavy clay. This was a lesson I learned profoundly that day. As my shovel broke through the topsoil, then a thin layer of fragmented rock, it suddenly struck something soft, yet surprisingly resistant. It felt, disturbingly, like old leather. I pushed down harder, forcing the shovel through this strange, pliable layer. Immediately beneath it, my shovel met something very hard, a solid object with a complex and clearly detailed shape. My aunt was convinced it was some ancient protection for the gold, urging me to break through it. My parents, wanting to appease her and perhaps just wanting the digging to be over, also encouraged me to continue. But it was useless. The object was too large, occupying most of the excavated area, making it impossible to dig around it. It was as if the hole itself had been precisely made to contain this one hidden item. My aunt, finally admitting defeat, declared that she would cover the hole before we left. She did not. We went home, leaving the disturbing opening uncovered. That night was an absolute nightmare. The gentle tapping on my window was gone, replaced by a relentless, thunderous banging that reverberated through the small room. The unseen thing kept entering my room, not just once or twice, but non-stop, an oppressive, terrifying presence. Even my powerful flashlight, which had offered a sliver of comfort on previous nights, seemed to have no effect. Its beam cut through the darkness, but the sensation of being watched, of something standing over me, remained stubbornly. I was forced to stay awake, lying perfectly still, feeling an immense suffocating pressure bearing down on me from all sides. My door, despite my repeated attempts to secure it, simply would not stay closed. The entity, whatever it was, continued to make faint, disembodied noises, and it felt as though it was perpetually there, just beyond my sight, always staring. This is where the security cameras, those devices installed for a mundane purpose, became critically important. The moment the truly terrifying events of that night began, they ceased to function. All 4 cameras, which had been diligently recording, had stopped working. One camera pointed towards the farmhouse, another towards the outdoor washroom. A third specifically captured the view of my window, and the fourth was directed towards the ominous forest. That morning, with a profound sense of dread, I went to check the footage. For 3 of the cameras, there was nothing but endless static, a silent testament to their failure. But the camera pointing towards the forest, the one facing the very spot where we had dug, showed something. There was a small, inexplicable blur, a distortion in the image, captured at the precise moment the nightmare had begun. After that horrifying night, the dark presence never appeared again. I still struggled deeply with sleep, haunted by the memory of the sheer terror, but the immediate, active manifestations of the entity stopped. Things became quieter, a semblance of peace returning, though the lingering feeling of dread remained. Sometime after these events, my family finally moved out of the property, leaving the unsettling farm behind us. Even now, 4 years later, I find myself constantly thinking about it. The experiences were far too real, far too tangible, to dismiss as mere products of my imagination. Other people, too, had noticed strange things, confirming that it was not just my isolated perception. The memory of what we struck while digging, that soft, resistant layer, and the hard, complex shape beneath it, haunts my thoughts frequently. And the sheer, unadulterated terror of that worst night, when the presence unleashed its full force, remains vivid in my mind. I often wonder, with a chilling certainty, if we had unearthed a human body, or perhaps some ancient, cursed object, deliberately buried to remain hidden from the world. The uncertainty, the unanswered questions, continue to disturb me to this very day. I am now 22 years old, and a rather peculiar object has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. My grandfather, who passed away from lung cancer while my mother was pregnant with me, left behind only one personal item for me, a small clown doll. It was a simple toy, meant to hang innocently above my crib, a silent guardian in my earliest days. This clown had a specific mechanism. When one of its legs was gently pulled downwards, a tiny music box nestled within its fabric would begin to play, a sweet tinkling star song as the legs slowly retracted back into place. I am well aware that this already sounds like the beginning of a rather familiar horror tale, but I assure you, my experience transcends cliché. As a young child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, I used to keep this clown doll hanging in my room. It hung not over a crib, but from the sturdy metal curtain tiebacks near my window. I suppose I was too young at that age to have been exposed to the common horror tropes of haunted dolls through books or movies, so its presence felt entirely normal to me. One unforgettable night, however, my mother ascended the stairs and quietly entered my room while I was deep in sleep. She was drawn by the sound of the clown playing its melody, a sound that, under the circumstances, was deeply unsettling. The doll's leg was fully extended downwards, and it continued to play its star song for what my mother estimated was about 5 minutes. I distinctly remember her recording this strange event on her old, clunky flip phone, and she showed me the footage the very next morning. The memory of that tinny, repetitive melody still sends a shiver down my spine. Later that same day, we received somber news. My great-grandmother, my grandfather's mother, had passed away during the night. My mother, a woman of deep convictions, is absolutely certain that this bizarre incident with the clown doll was a message from her father, a signal from beyond the veil, perhaps letting us know of his mother's journey. I have often pondered what others might make of this connection, whether it was a mere coincidence or something more profound. I should begin by admitting that I was once a skeptic, someone who did not believe in the existence of ghosts or any form of paranormal phenomena. That changed, however, during my employment in a very old building. The structure itself dated back to the 1890s, and I had been told by my colleagues that it had once functioned as a brothel. My job often required me to work late, sometimes through the night, to catch up on tasks or simply to get ahead. Many strange occurrences seemed to concentrate on the second floor of this building. One night, a little after 3 o'clock in the morning, I found myself needing to go upstairs to put some items away and lock up for the night. The light switch for the second floor hallway was situated at the very top of the stairs, which meant I had to ascend the steps in complete darkness. The hallway itself had no windows, so the only light filtering up from below provided scant illumination. As I reached the top of the stairs, a fleeting image caught my eye. I was convinced I saw a human figure, a dark shape, dart across the hall. It moved from one room to another, seemingly passing straight through 2 closed and locked doors. The speed of its movement was unnerving, like a video sped up by 50%, an unnatural, jerky motion. I was certainly unnerved, a prickle of unease spreading across my skin, but my ingrained skepticism told me it was likely just my imagination, a trick of the light, or perhaps simply my tired eyes playing games. The second floor of this old building always had a way of unsettling me, especially at night. My coworker, a much more grounded individual, often admitted to feeling the same strange apprehension. Despite my internal doubts, I turned on the light at the top of the stairs, flooding the hallway with a stark, artificial glow, and then walked down the corridor to put some things away in the storeroom. While I was inside the storeroom, with my back turned as I sorted through supplies, a large, heavy machine part that had been resting flat on a table suddenly toppled over. It was a solid, weighty object with a perfectly flat bottom, and it had been placed in a stable position. There was no logical way it could have simply fallen on its own, nor could I have accidentally knocked it over from my position. My heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Without thinking, I spoke aloud into the empty room, my voice a shaky whisper. "I am sorry. I'm leaving now." The words seemed to hang in the still air. I quickly locked the storeroom door and began to walk, then almost run back down the hallway. As I hurried along, a distinct gust of wind seemed to blow through the hallway, originating from directly behind me. This was impossible. There were no open doors or windows anywhere in the building that led to the outside, and I was the only person present. It could not have been a natural pressure differential or a stray draft. The chill that accompanied it was profoundly unnatural. I increased my pace, almost a speed walk now, as I passed between the 2 doors where I had initially glimpsed the fast-moving apparition. And then, I swear, I heard a woman's voice, soft but clear, whisper my name from right behind me. It was a sound that turned my blood to ice. I fumbled for the light switch, plunging the hallway back into darkness, and stumbled quickly down the stairs. Halfway down the staircase, there was a small landing with a heavy door. My fingers trembled as I tried to manipulate the latch that held the door open, desperate to close it. I was terrified to look back up into the dark, empty hallway above me. Finally, I managed to shut the door, and as I desperately pushed the lock into place, I felt an undeniable certainty. There was something on the other side. A wave of pure panic washed over me. I clocked out of the building as quickly as my shaking hands would allow. A few days later, I found myself back on opening shift, arriving before dawn. As I moved through the building, I began to speak aloud, addressing the ghost, or whatever it was that inhabited the space. I apologized for my intrusion, for disturbing its peace, and I pleaded to be left alone. I felt utterly insane, talking to an empty room, but it seemed a better alternative than enduring another night of terror. For the most part, everything seemed normal that morning, a quiet stillness in the old building. Yet, as I passed between those two notorious doors, I distinctly felt a light grasp on the back of my shirt, a fleeting touch that made my breath catch in my throat. That was the last time I ever ventured up to that second floor alone in the dark. The memory still makes my skin crawl. I am currently on vacation in a town in Mexico, a place where many of my family members reside. My grandparents, 4 uncles and their families, and my own family all live on the same street, a kind of extended family compound. We live on a sprawling ranch far removed from urban centers. The nearest airport is a 4-hour drive away, making it a true journey to reach our destination. When we first arrived, my Uncle D, one of my father's brothers, picked us up from the airport. On our long drive back to the ranch, he and my father were catching up, exchanging news and stories. It was then that my uncle began to recount some unsettling experiences they had been having. He spoke of a doll, a single, ordinary-looking doll, that had apparently been haunting him and his family for quite some time. His stories were chilling. The doll, he claimed, would keep them awake throughout the night, not with loud, dramatic disturbances, but with persistent, rhythmic knocking on their windows, a sound that seemed to come from directly outside. It was a relentless, unnerving presence. He also claimed that this doll was actively attacking people who walked down the street late at night. He even mentioned a man who, driven to desperation, had actually tried to shoot the doll, a testament to the level of fear and frustration it had caused. Everyone, it seemed, was at their wits' end, completely fed up with its antics. My uncle even spoke of attempts to organize a group of people, a kind of vigilante committee, to confront and destroy it. I listened, feeling a prickle of unease, but I honestly thought he might be exaggerating, perhaps even telling a tall tale to amuse us. For the first 2 days after our arrival, we stayed at my aunt's house. Our own family home on the ranch was undergoing renovations and was not yet ready for us to inhabit. Those 2 nights were deeply disturbing for me. I found it impossible to fall into a peaceful sleep. Every time my eyelids closed, I was plunged into a vivid and terrifying dream. A sensation of being physically assaulted, a heavy pressure, a struggle against an unseen force. I recounted these troubling dreams to my father, who, seeing my distress, decided that we should try and sleep in our own newly renovated house on our 3rd night. That evening, we were walking down the street late at night, heading to visit my grandparents. My Uncle Jay was there, and he had been drinking. As we spoke, he suddenly slurred a warning, saying that the doll was going to get us if we continued to walk around at night. Given his inebriated state, I quickly dismissed his comment as drunken rambling. Later that night, we returned home and attempted to sleep in our own house for the first time. I will not lie. The house felt profoundly creepy in the darkness. There was a long hallway that stretched towards an empty room, and I found myself unable to walk down it without feeling a distinct bad energy, a palpable sense of unease. My room faced a large glass sliding door that led to the backyard, and I constantly felt as though someone was watching me from beyond that glass. We have now been here for 3 weeks, and just yesterday, my little cousin Jack was with us in the backyard. We were burning trash, a common practice on the ranch, when he casually mentioned that the doll, the one my Uncle D had spoken of, lived in the big tree right in our backyard. Jack lives right next door, and there is no gate separating our properties. He then added that he could hear it cry at night, and that he had seen it once when he was going to their outdoor restroom, which is located towards their backyard. I did not fully believe him, but I was definitely spooked. That very same night, Uncle D's son was playing a video game with us, and Cousin Jack was there too. My brother, perhaps unwisely, brought up the topic of the doll, teasingly suggesting that Cousin Jack was making things up. As soon as the doll was mentioned, Uncle D's son went visibly pale. He quickly said he did not want to talk about it. That reaction truly unnerved me, because if the doll was indeed haunting them, as Uncle D claimed, then his son would certainly know something about it. The sheer fear in his eyes, the way he shut down, made me finally believe the stories. It got me thinking, and perhaps that is why I had felt so watched at night. My room facing that glass door, the tree standing directly in front of it. After a few more days, we noticed a terrible smell emanating from our kitchen sink. We were on vacation, so we were not cooking anything elaborate. The items in the sink were mainly just cups or bowls that had held cereal. We had gone on a 3-day trip to Guatemala, as we were staying in the Chiapas region, so the few dishes from that morning had been left uncleaned for 3 days. When we returned, an incredibly foul odor filled the kitchen, a rank smell that reminded me distinctly of rotten flesh. We could not figure out its source. I then began to clean the dishes, and to my horror, hundreds of larvae began to crawl out of the sink drain. Some might assume this was simply a result of our being dirty, but we never found anything in the sink that could have caused such a reek. No rotten meat, no food that the larvae were consuming. Some people suggested it must have been the pipes or something hidden within the walls, but the house was brand new, its walls constructed of solid brick and cement. As soon as the larvae emerged and were flushed away, the terrible smell completely vanished. It was like a scene from a horror movie, something out of a chilling film. We were all quite unsettled by the combined events. When my cousin began to describe the muñeca differently, using a local term for the doll, someone else suggested it sounded more like a mono or a monkey. This led us to the chilling conclusion that it might be a shapeshifter, an entity capable of altering its form. I have thankfully never encountered it directly, but stories always circulate in this region about unexplainable events. Some people say these are simply made-up tales, born out of boredom in the quiet countryside. Others, however, insist on their truth. I have had my own personal experiences there before. I have heard a dark, heavy voice speaking to me in English, even though no one in my family there speaks the language. I have had items I brought from the United States begin to move on their own when left unattended in that house. My brother even claimed that he heard the sorrowful cries of La Llorona, the weeping woman, one night when he was returning home late. It could, of course, be our collective imagination, a product of suggestion and local folklore. But I cannot deny that truly strange things do happen in Mexico. Because of my father's profession, our family was constantly moving, chasing his various job assignments. Sometimes we would spend only a few months in a single location before packing up everything again. After my father secured a new job in a small, quiet town, we found ourselves moving into a rather charming house situated on a dead-end road. It was a spacious home with beautiful wooden floors throughout, and it possessed a generally exceptional, inviting feeling. We were quite pleased to have found such a nice house within our price range, and in our eagerness, we did not really ponder too much on why it was empty, or why the landlords were so willing to rent it out for such a remarkably low cost. It would take only a few months before we discovered the unsettling truth for ourselves. The haunting began subtly, as merely a feeling that my siblings and I would experience from time to time. At first, it was just a general sense of unease. a fleeting sensation that something was amiss. But this quickly escalated as time went by. We slowly transitioned from simply thinking we were being watched to catching glimpses of shadowy forms at the very periphery of our vision. Fleeting blurs that vanished as soon as we tried to focus on them. The feeling of being watched had, by this point, extended into the night. Few of us were able to achieve a full, restful sleep. This unsettling progression continued until we began to see things much closer, directly in the forefront of our vision. We started seeing distinct dark forms in the night, scaring us to the point that we would all huddle together, sleeping on the same bed for an entire week, seeking a collective sense of security in numbers. Then, one day, my brother and I stumbled upon the chilling reason for the persistent haunting. We were cleaning out an old closet, a space into which we had simply dumped a pile of our toys after we first moved in. The bottom of this closet was somewhat unusual, with a small wall forming a kind of built-in toy chest. We had finally acquired some proper boxes to store our belongings and no longer needed to leave our things haphazardly in the closet. As we pulled out our toys, we noticed that the carpet in the bottom of the closet was loose. We were just children, and perhaps not very smart. So instead of informing our parents, we simply pulled the carpet back ourselves. What it revealed was something none of us would ever forget. There, embedded in the floor of our closet, was a tombstone. It was undeniably a real tombstone, with a name and dates already carved into its surface. The immediate, terrifying thought that flashed through our young minds was that someone was buried right there in our closet. We quickly, frantically, showed the tombstone to our parents. Thankfully, they decided to remove it from the house, and we, in our childlike innocence, thought that would be the end of it. But the haunting did not stop. In fact, it seemed to intensify. We started having vivid, disturbing nightmares, and we would frequently experience sudden, inexplicable spells of illness whenever we were left alone in the house. What happened next was something a 7-year-old me simply could not comprehend. All I knew was an overwhelming, paralyzing fear. I would awaken at all hours of the night to see a dark, imposing figure standing over me, silently watching me sleep. I would instinctively pull my sheets over my head, burying myself, and pray to whatever higher power I knew of to protect me. Usually, this simple act seemed to work, providing a temporary shield from the horror. But sometimes, when I gathered enough courage to lower the sheet, I would find a dark, ghostly face staring directly into my eyes, its features unnervingly close, mere inches from my own. Soon, all of us, my siblings and I, were seeing these terrifying faces in the dark. We stopped doing things on our own at night. We would share beds, often waking up whoever we were sleeping with if we needed to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water, simply because we could not bear to be alone. We would never get up or do anything by ourselves once darkness fell. The final breaking point came on a night when I was foolishly walking around the house alone during a fierce lightning storm. As I entered my room, a flash of lightning illuminated the space at precisely the right moment. And there, beneath my bed, I saw a figure staring up at me. Its face was contorted into a wide, terrifying grin that stretched from ear to ear, revealing bared, needle-like teeth. I screamed, an absolute primal shriek of terror that seemed to echo in the storm-filled silence. It took days before I was even willing to play in my own room again. We eventually removed all the bed frames from our rooms, opting instead to sleep with our mattresses directly on the floor, hoping this would provide some form of protection from whatever unseen horror lurked beneath. But the nightmares and the terrifying sightings continued, a relentless assault on our young minds. Thankfully, my father's job eventually moved to a new location, providing us with a much-needed escape. We were able to leave that house behind after only 6 months of living there. In that short span, we had gone from being delighted with such a nice home to desperately wanting nothing more than to abandon it. I will never forget the horror we experienced within those walls. and it has left permanent scars on my soul. Even to this day, almost 25 years later, I still occasionally have nightmares about living in that house, a chilling reminder of the unknown entities that shared our space. God only knows what monsters truly lurk there with us. Even recounting this story now, speaking these words aloud, has left my heart pounding with the lingering fear of that haunting memory. A few years ago, I was browsing an online forum, a place where people shared various unusual experiences. A woman there posted something intriguing. She claimed to possess a haunted photograph. She explained that the picture was of herself, but upon closer inspection, a ghostly girl appeared beside her, a figure that had most certainly not been present when the image was originally captured. More importantly, she asserted that anyone who viewed this particular photograph subsequently experienced a string of unfortunate events. Naturally, my curiosity was piqued. I felt an irresistible urge to see it for myself. She sent me a link, and there it was. It was exactly as she had described. The image itself did not strike me as overtly scary. In fact, it seemed rather mundane. And as far as I could tell at the time, nothing unusual happened to me after I viewed it. Eventually, I simply forgot about it. Not long ago, I was sifting through my old messages, searching for something entirely unrelated, when I stumbled across the link to that very photograph. A wave of mild curiosity washed over me once more. I clicked on it, and I spent perhaps 2 minutes staring at the image, trying to discern the details of the ghostly girl, to understand what made her so unsettling. Then I simply closed the tab and thought nothing more of it. Not 2 hours later, my stepmother called me. Her voice was strained as she delivered shocking news. My father had suffered a pulmonary embolism. He had passed away on his way home from work. The very same day, my husband, driving home, hit a deer, an impact so severe that it completely totaled our car. And that night, my daughter suddenly developed a horrible stomach bug, an illness that left her so severely dehydrated that we had to rush her to the emergency room. It was a cascade of misfortunes, a truly terrible day. I made a silent vow then and there. I will never, ever look at that photograph again. The correlation, whether real or imagined, was simply too terrifying to dismiss. When my mother remarried, my sister and I found ourselves moving into a small one-story house on a street called Nevada. My mother had married a man my sister and I had only met twice before, and they had been dating for merely 6 months before deciding to tie the knot. Even at 10 years old, I distinctly felt that this was an incredibly short amount of time to commit to marriage with someone you had only just begun to know. The house seemed perfectly fine at first glance, but I soon began to realize how unsettling it truly was. My sister and I, in classic sibling fashion, debated intensely over who would get the top bunk in our new shared room. We settled the argument with a game of rock, paper, scissors, and I emerged victorious, relishing the chance to rub it in her face. I genuinely enjoyed my top bunk that day, at least until night fell. I cannot recall precisely how soon after moving in it happened, but it was not long, perhaps less than a month, maybe even just 2 weeks. I awoke in the dead of night to the sound of distinct, heavy thumps on the ceiling, a rhythmic noise that sounded exactly like heavy boots walking directly over my head. I was absolutely petrified, my body completely stiff with fear. I simply squeezed my eyes shut, wishing for it to end. Some nights, the sounds changed. It was not the heavy boots, but rather the lighter patter of small feet running across the ceiling, a series of tiny thuds. And then, a sudden loud boom, the unmistakable sound of a small boy crashing to the floor of the ceiling above me. Each time, I would wake up, my heart pounding, completely petrified. I tried to explain these experiences to my mother, but she simply shrugged them off as a recurring nightmare, attributing my fear to an overactive imagination. From that point on, I began sleeping with my lights on, a small comfort against the oppressive darkness. Our house had an old, bulky computer in the basement, one of those thick, heavy models common in the 1990s, before flat-screen models became popular. The basement itself was surprisingly finished, with a proper ceiling and carpeted floors. It was an inviting space in many ways, but I always felt an intense sense of unease down there, a pervasive feeling of being constantly watched and stared at. Despite this, I spent a lot of time there, downloading my favorite music onto CDs or playing pinball, trying to ignore the chilling atmosphere. At the time, I had a pet, a dog named Snickers, who would frequently growl or bark at the walls, seemingly at nothing. At first, I simply dismissed it as my dog being silly, perhaps chasing imaginary mice. Then, she started growling at me as I sat at the computer desk, her barks low and guttural, backing away as if something unseen was standing right behind me. A profound chill crawled down my spine when I finally realized she was barking at the empty space directly beneath the desk, right where I was sitting. Needless to say, I darted out of there immediately. I always tried to avoid the basement after that, because I truly believed that whenever I was down there, something was peeking around the corner, watching me. As the years passed, I began to see more things. From wispy white shadows gliding through the hallway to dark, black figures seemingly climbing the walls, the strange occurrences became a more regular part of my life. My mother, however, seemed to grow less and less receptive to my stories. She would simply dismiss them or pretend not to hear, and eventually, she appeared to care less about what I had to say. So, I tried my best to ignore it all. The thumps on the ceiling continued each night, and the feeling of being constantly watched never truly went away. The most terrifying incident occurred when I was 13. I was lying on my parents' bed, playing on my mother's flip phone, excited to have a few moments of undisturbed entertainment while she used the bathroom. I was relaxed, engrossed in a game of Tetris, waiting for my mother to emerge. All of a sudden, something strong and powerful delivered a forceful kick to the bed, causing it to visibly move. I could see ripples in the bedspread, emanating from the point of impact. I was absolutely scared out of my skin and immediately jumped off the bed. I bolted towards the bathroom, only to find that my mother had locked the door. I began pounding on the door, begging my mother, almost in tears, to let me in. She begrudgingly opened it, and of course, tried to rationalize my terror, suggesting it was merely a spring in the bed popping. The Nevada house always carried this strong, palpable negative aura, almost evil. My stepfather and mother argued constantly, their fights often escalating to the point where he would physically abuse her and verbally and emotionally abuse us. It was as if this entity in the house thrived off the negativity, feeding on the conflict and despair. We eventually moved out, relocating to a bigger 4-bedroom house with 2 levels. Walking into that new house felt like a breath of fresh air. There were no more thumps in the night, no more constant feeling of being watched everywhere I went. It was a profound sense of relief. However, my stepfather continued his abusive behavior. He was simply a terrible person, acting like a walking battery of negative energy, providing a constant source of fuel for any entities that might linger nearby. When I was a child, during a family visit to New Orleans, my relatives and I went to a voodoo shop. I wish I could remember the name of the place, but I know it was not one of the typical tourist attractions. It was a little more difficult to find, tucked away, and it felt distinct from all the others. Anyway, I thought it would be quite cool to purchase a small black doll, crudely made from cloth. It had no discernible face or features, just a black cloth shape, stuffed and sewn together to vaguely resemble a human figure. The shopkeeper sold it to me as a voodoo doll of death. Looking back on it now, with the benefit of hindsight, I feel quite foolish for willingly bringing such an object home with me. Once we returned from our trip, strange occurrences began to plague my entire family. The odd events continued, escalating slowly, until we eventually felt compelled to move out of the house because of them. Hearing faint whispers in my room late at night, spoken in an unintelligible language, became a common occurrence. I also distinctly heard an angry man's voice, rough and guttural, say my name from directly behind my ear as I was turning on the living room television. I literally felt a cold puff of breath on my neck. None of these experiences, however, were believed by my family when I would tell them about them. I was under 12 years old at the time, so it is understandable that they might have dismissed my stories as childish imaginings. What ultimately changed their minds and led us to move the very next day was my mother's terrifying experience. She saw a luminous orb, a glowing sphere, come directly up to her face as she was just about to fall asleep. She later recounted that she felt completely unable to breathe for almost a full minute while the orb hovered inches from her face. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it flew across the room into a corner and vanished. What makes this story even more unsettling is what happened after we moved. We found a new place relatively close by, and the new people who moved into our old house became friends with us. They began to tell us that their children were hearing whispers at night. We had never told them about our experiences before they mentioned this, which is the truly crazy part. I am still not entirely certain if all of this was directly tied to the doll, but other stories I've heard since have made me strongly suspect that it might be. When I was 16, I landed a job as a personal assistant and cleaning lady for a very wealthy couple. They lived in an enormous, beautiful mansion situated right on the shores of Lake Michigan. At the time, it seemed like an incredible opportunity. I was making $12 an hour as a 16-year-old girl, which felt like an outrageous sum to me. However, I now understand that this generous wage was likely due to the fact that the homeowners struggled to keep anyone employed there for long. It could very well have been because they were both rather unpleasant individuals, but truthfully, I did not interact with them much during the school year, so it was not a significant issue for me. During the summer months, I would work 40 hours a week, and then transition to part-time once school resumed. During the school year, I would hardly ever see the homeowners at all, and I would be left completely alone to clean the massive house. I had my own key, an alarm code, and a gate code, giving me full access to let myself in and out. In the summer, I had the assistance of a few other employees, but during the school year, I was entirely by myself. At first, I absolutely loved being in the house alone. Do not misunderstand me. The place was absolutely gorgeous, with stunning views of Lake Michigan. I would always open the curtains wide to let the sunlight stream in and blast music through the surround sound speakers as I cleaned. It was not until I was truly by myself, consistently, that I began to notice how strange the place felt. Nothing about the mansion ever felt truly welcoming. It was beautiful to look at, certainly, but it was modern, filled with hard marble and cold stone, lacking any genuine warmth or homely feeling. My first truly unsettling experience occurred one day when I was cleaning in silence. I distinctly remember not turning on the music because I had a bad headache that day. All of a sudden, the speakers in the upstairs part of the house inexplicably turned themselves on. Their speaker system was quite advanced. It could be controlled by a touchpad in the kitchen, which would play music throughout the entire house, with the exception of the basement and the master bedroom. To play music in those specific areas, one had to go to the individual touchpad in that particular zone and turn it on separately, then sync it up with the rest of the house. The reason this incident was so alarming was simple. I was the only person there. I walked up the stairs, my heart beginning to quicken, to investigate what was happening and to figure out how the music had seemingly turned itself on. I looked around, calling out the homeowner's name, wondering if someone had entered without my noticing. But all the doors were still securely locked, and it was clear no one else was home. I shut off the music and went back downstairs, trying not to think too much of it. But then, it started happening more often. I would be listening to music, and it would abruptly turn off, or it would be off, and then suddenly turn on in a completely different area of the house. I tried to brush it off as faulty wiring or a glitch in the system, and did not dwell on it. The second most prevalent and memorable story from my time working there happened when I was cleaning the workout room in the basement. I absolutely never wanted to go into this room, and I honestly could not articulate why. Something about that particular room was profoundly unsettling. It was always super cold and dark, and I felt a deep sense of anxiety whenever I was in there. I definitely tried to avoid it, but my boss would get upset when dust accumulated, so I forced myself to go in there once a week to tidy up. I was in the workout room, using a broom and a mop. I remember sweeping the floor, and then for a moment, I propped the broom against a machine while I used the mop. Suddenly, the broom fell over, hitting the wall, then the baseboard, and finally the floor as it went down, causing 3 distinct sounds as it collided with each surface. What I heard immediately after that scared me so badly that I refused to go back into the room by myself again. Immediately following the 3 sounds made by the falling broom, 3 distinct sounds responded in the exact same pattern, but they were coming from inside the wall. I know what many might think, but no. It was not merely an echo. It was not a scared animal trapped within the walls. It was deliberate, clear, responsive sounds. I was completely alone in that enormous, quiet house in the middle of nowhere, and something was clearly making a sound back at me from inside the wall. To this day, I have absolutely no logical explanation for what I experienced. Lastly, this was the first and only time I have ever seen anything paranormal with my own 2 eyes. And I know this time it was not just my paranoia or my imagination, because I was with a coworker who also witnessed it. Sometimes, my boss would rent out her guest house, and we would clean it before the new guests arrived. This guest house had a long glass hallway leading from one main area of the house to another. I was diligently cleaning the glass panels when one of my coworkers, a man named Bob, was standing beside me. Just then, I caught a fleeting glimpse of what appeared to be a boy in a blue shirt running by, a quick darting movement at the edge of my vision. I instantly turned my head, just as Bob turned his, and he immediately asked if I had seen it too. Those are the most unsettling things that happened during my time there. It was nearly 6 years ago, and those experiences will forever haunt me. The lingering memories of what I saw and heard within that beautiful, yet disturbing, mansion. I used to work contract security at the emergency room entrance of a downtown hospital. My shift was the graveyard shift, meaning I worked through the quiet, late hours of the night. My station was a small kiosk positioned just inside the main entrance, where my primary duty was to monitor access to the hospital. Across from my kiosk, there were 2 sets of elevators. The first elevator, located on the right, could only ascend to the 3rd floor. The 2 floors directly above us were administrative floors, housing offices only, with no patient areas. Consequently, during my shift, floors 2 and 3 were completely closed for the night, empty and quiet. The second elevator, the one on the left, was different. It required special training to operate, as it serviced the same floors as the first elevator, but with the critical addition of a helipad on the roof. This was where life flight helicopters would land, bringing in life or death patients who needed to be rushed directly to the emergency room. As a security officer, we would receive notification when a life flight helicopter was en route. Upon receiving this alert, we would immediately take the left elevator, using our special access key to ascend to the helipad on the roof. Once there, we would lock the elevator doors in the open position, ensuring that no one could summon it from another floor. The elevator would remain open and in position until the life flight crew had the patient safely inside and pressed the floor 1 button. Our role as security was not to assist the life flight crew with the patient. Rather, we would take the stairs down as soon as we had the elevator prepped and secured on the helipad. It had been explained to me in grim detail that this process was of the utmost importance, and that, unfortunately, people had tragically passed away on the helipad itself, and even during the descent in that very elevator. I am not, by nature, a person who believes in ghosts. I had never, prior to this job, had any personal experiences with hauntings or the paranormal. But that particular elevator, the one on the left, behaved in an undeniably odd manner every single night I worked. The elevator on the right, the one that only serviced the 3 lower floors, would consistently rest on the first floor. Since the floors it served were not in use during my shift, it simply remained there, waiting. Whenever I needed to go to the elevators, I never had to wait for the right one to arrive. It was always already there. The left elevator, however, the one that serviced the helipad in the higher floors, truly seemed to have a mind of its own. All night long, it would travel up and down from floor to floor with no one inside. I could clearly watch the floor indicator display as it bounced erratically, seemingly at random, from one floor to another, throughout my entire shift. It would frequently descend to the main floor, its doors opening wide to reveal an empty car, then close itself and ascend again, often to floors 2, 3, or even 5, which was the helipad. This activity, with no one visibly inside, was a constant, unsettling display. I knew for a fact that the custodial crew had finished their work on floors 2 and 3 by 10 o'clock in the evening, long before my shift even began. There was simply no one around to be using those elevators during my working hours. On my nightly checks of those floors, I never saw a single soul up there. The lights were even turned off. Not only that, but the left elevator would regularly travel all the way to the helipad by itself, even though one required a special access key to even select that option. The other security guards had no coherent explanation for this strange behavior. The hospital employees, clearly not wanting to be seen as believing in a haunted elevator, would quickly change the subject or simply brush off my questions whenever I asked why the lift was so peculiar. But I would watch from my security kiosk all night, observing that thing as it moved from floor to floor. It would open up on the first floor, directly across from me, and it was always, without fail, empty. The other elevator, the one that only went to floors 2 or 3, never moved unless another security officer explicitly used it. The contrast was stark and profoundly unsettling. The quiet hum of the hospital, punctuated by the ghostly movements of that solitary elevator, remains a vivid and chilling memory. A number of years ago, my family embarked on a new chapter, moving into a grand old house in the countryside. It was a stunning Georgian mansion, a true rarity, incredibly old, yet remarkably well maintained. The previous owners were selling it at a ludicrously low price, an almost unbelievable bargain. My parents, who had always harbored dreams of owning a home of such architectural beauty and historical significance, eagerly seized the opportunity. They were delighted, and we all believed we had found a true gem. It was not long, however, probably within the first few days of our moving in, that we began to realize something was profoundly off. The house, despite its apparent beauty, needed a substantial amount of restorative work. Much of the old wood had started to go moldy and was in desperate need of replacement. It was clear that the previous owners had not lived there for some time, and as such, the grand old place had considerably deteriorated. In any case, my parents faced a daunting task ahead of them, a massive project of renovation and restoration. It was while they were clearing away rubbish, sifting through the accumulated debris of years, that we all saw something truly unsettling. We were all together, my parents, my siblings, and I, moving things, bagging up what we would not need to be thrown out. We were in a hallway, working quietly, when suddenly, all four of us looked up, our gazes drawn by an unseen force. And there it was, a small girl, seemingly no older than 5 or 6, happily and obliviously skipping away down the hallway, disappearing into the dimness at the far end. My dad, reacting instinctively, immediately called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" and ran over to see who this girl was and why she was in our house. His initial assumption was that she thought the house was still abandoned, which it clearly no longer was, and was trespassing. Despite the fact that there were now cars in the driveway, visible signs of occupancy, he expected to find a neighborhood child. But upon a thorough, meticulous search of the entire house, he found absolutely nothing. The little girl had simply vanished. Sightings of this mysterious little girl continued. There would be some nights when I would hear faint, childish giggling echoing down the hallway, a sound that, in the stillness of the night, was deeply unnerving. Other times I would hear my bedroom door slowly creak open, and as I opened my eyes, I would glimpse a pair of small eyes staring at me from the darkness before vanishing into nothingness. Every single member of my family was afflicted by the disturbing presence of this little girl. Her infernal laughter, the chilling sensation of breath on the back of your head when you turned around to find no one there. It was driving my parents to their wits' end. They tried to get in contact with the previous owners, but discovered that they had moved out of the country entirely. My parents were beginning to understand why. They conducted some local research, inquiring about the house's history, but did not uncover much relevant information. Then, about 4 months later, my mother was digging in the garden, a mundane chore, when she unearthed something completely unexpected. She found a small shoe. As she pulled the shoe out of the ground, she made a horrifying discovery. It was still attached to a skeletal leg. The police were immediately called, and it turned out that she had unearthed the remains of a small girl, probably no older than 6 to 8 years old. This was a truly terrifying discovery, bringing a grim reality to the unsettling events. We, as a family, took it upon ourselves to pay for a casket and give the little girl a proper funeral. It was only after this act of respectful burial that the activity in the house truly began to die down. It did not stop altogether, but it significantly minimized. As time went on, the strange occurrences nearly completely ceased, and we almost forgot that we had a ghostly inhabitant in our home. The house, as it turned out, was a far more extensive project for my parents than they had originally anticipated. It required so much more work and money than they were prepared to invest. Sadly, they eventually had to sell the property, taking a considerable financial loss. I was, however, personally glad to no longer be the plaything of some spiritual girl from what felt like another dimension. The next house we moved into was completely ghost-free, and that, I believe, is how I prefer my life to be from now on. About 6 months ago, around the same time my very young daughter started to be able to communicate effectively, she began telling us about seeing a lady in our house. She described her as an older woman, consistently wearing brown clothing. We affectionately, though somewhat unnervingly, began to refer to her simply as the lady. I showed my daughter photographs of all her great-grandparents on both sides of the family, thinking it might be a deceased family member, a familiar face from the past. But she never recognized anyone in the pictures. Around the same time, we started noticing strange sounds. Doors creaking open, rustling noises, and things dropping. Cabinet doors would creak open on their own. While unsettling, everything we heard could potentially be explained away by mundane causes, or so we tried to convince ourselves. The frequency of these strange sounds increased significantly about 5 weeks ago. Then, one day, I was brushing my teeth in our bathroom, and I clearly saw a cabinet door and the reflection of the mirror behind me swing wide open by itself. Again, it was super strange, but I tried to come up with some potential, albeit unlikely, explanation. 2 days later, we discovered a massive water leak directly behind that same mirror. Because of the extensive water damage, all of our belongings had to be moved out of our house for the contractors to repair the damage. I was in the process of cleaning and boxing up our possessions. I was boxing up an item in our bedroom when I discovered 2 old photographs, likely from the 1880s. As soon as I pulled them out, my daughter, without prompting, pointed and exclaimed, "That's the lady." I asked her which one, and she unhesitatingly pointed to the younger of the 2 women in the photographs. We asked her 3 separate times throughout the day about the photographs, and each time, she consistently pointed out the exact same lady. We also noticed that the lady in the photo appeared to be wearing brown, a common color in the sepia tones of old photography, matching my daughter's description. Following this discovery, we decided to take the photographs out of the house. We moved them to my new art studio, a separate building on our property that was still under construction. Since removing those old photographs, we have not heard a single strange noise in our house. My oldest daughter, who had complained since she was a little girl about moving shadows in her room at night, and rarely made it through the night in her own bed, has since slept soundly in her bed every night. She sleeps all night long now, something she had never done before the photographs were removed. The daughter who initially saw the lady usually sees her once every week to 2 weeks, so it is still too early to comment definitively on whether those sightings have ceased entirely, but the reduction in other activity is profound. Completely surprised by the drastic change in our house, I decided to use a dream sleep recording application on my phone. This application only records when it detects sounds, and I wanted to see if I could catch anything near the photographs in the studio. My primary goal was to prove or disprove the connection to myself. I set it to record on a Thursday afternoon for 3 hours and ended up with 7 audio clips, all of which were easily identifiable as birds and planes. I tried again on Thursday night, setting it to record from midnight until 8 o'clock in the morning. This time, I had 67 clips. Most of the clips were a bizarre, reverberating electrical feedback, a strange, humming noise that started up after midnight and continued on and off for hours. I also heard what sounded like 2 separate single knocks, or perhaps objects dropping. There was nothing electrical in the studio itself, except the phone. The building did not even have a breaker box installed yet. There was a power pole outside the building, about 20 feet from the front. Last night, we left the recorder on again, from 11:30 in the evening until 7 o'clock in the morning. Not one weird electrical sound was recorded all night. We literally only caught crickets and 1 clip with 2 small bumps or knocks, followed by a rustling sound. We also captured a strange, almost ethereal sound at the very end of 1 clip. We cannot remember how we came into possession of these photographs. They are not of our family. We confirmed this with both sets of our parents. My husband thinks he vaguely recalls that one of my customers gave them to me a few years ago. The sudden peace in our home, following the removal of those old images, is undeniable. Almost 2 years ago, my boyfriend and I decided to move from one house to a much larger one that had previously belonged to his aunt. At the time of the move, my son was 2 years old, and my daughter was just a few months old, still a tiny infant. A few weeks after we settled into the new place, I began to notice a peculiar pattern. My son would frequently get out of bed in the middle of the night and walk down the hallway. He would stand there, perfectly still, simply staring at me without uttering a single word. I would ask him if he needed anything, but he never responded. Eventually, I would pick him up and gently carry him back to his bed. I assumed, at first, that he was merely sleepwalking, as I myself used to sleepwalk quite often as a child. Then, one night, he woke me up in a state of panic, clearly agitated. He was frantically trying to get me to follow him into the living room. He kept repeating over and over, "Come on, Mommy, come on." So, I got out of bed and walked with him to the living room. The television was on, displaying nothing but a static screen, a hissing white noise filling the room. My son was staring at me with a very blank, almost vacant expression on his face. I again assumed he was sleepwalking. I asked him if he had turned the television on, and he shook his head, saying no. When I asked him if he could turn it off and show me how, he could not find the power button and became frustrated that he could not figure it out. The television I had at the time was a bit peculiar. Its power button was located on the back, towards the right side. Given his inability to turn it off, and the fact that he was only 2 years old, I concluded that it could not have been him who had turned it on. Fast forward a few months. I was in the kids' playroom, sitting on the couch with my son, who had fallen asleep on my lap while we were watching a movie. Suddenly, I distinctly heard movement in the kitchen. I got up to see if my boyfriend was awake, but found no one there. The whole situation felt very strange, as though I was being watched, a palpable presence in the empty room. I went back to the playroom, picked up my son, and carried him to his bed. Over the next few weeks, I kept hearing what sounded like people walking around the house when no one else was awake. One night, we arrived home from a late-night grocery shopping trip. As I was pulling bags out of the trunk of the vehicle, I clearly heard someone humming. I immediately looked around our yard, scanning for anyone who might be out for a late-night stroll, which would have been odd, since we live on a random back road surrounded by dense woods. I walked around to the backyard, but still saw nothing. It was utterly baffling. One week, my boyfriend's father and stepmother decided to come and stay with us for a few days to visit. The first few nights they were here, everything was normal, quiet, and uneventful. But then, one night, something rather strange happened. My daughter was being extremely fussy, absolutely refusing to go to bed. So, I took her into the living room around midnight, trying to rock her to sleep while everyone else was already asleep in their beds. I finally managed to get her to fall asleep at 1:30 in the morning. I carefully laid her down in her crib and then got myself into bed. I climbed under the comforter and pulled out my phone to scroll through the internet, trying to wind down. That is when I heard it, a distinct sound, as if someone was crawling into my room, on the floor, moving around my bed and over to my boyfriend's side where he was sleeping. I felt a prickle of fear. I knew it could not be my daughter. She was far too young to get out of her crib on her own. Then I thought, perhaps my son is up, trying to sneak out of bed. But I was too nervous to look over there. So, I got up and walked out of the room to peek in on my daughter and make sure she was still soundly asleep. Then, I went down the hall to my son's room to confirm that he too was still deeply asleep in his bed. Both were undisturbed. I went back to my bed, trying to convince myself that I had probably just imagined the sounds, that I desperately needed sleep. The next morning, everyone was in the living room, drinking coffee and chatting. I looked over at my boyfriend and asked him if he had heard anything unusual last night. He said no. He had not woken up at all, but his stepmother chimed in, saying, "I heard you in the living room at 3 in the morning. Does the baby usually keep you up that late?" I told her it was not me, that I had already been in bed at that time. She then added, "I heard the baby banging around on the walls and moving toys. I assumed you were still up." I emphatically told her it was not us, and that we had already gone to sleep at that point. And now, currently, I keep having recurring dreams of myself lying in bed at night, and a dark figure of someone just walking into the room and standing over me. only to wake up and realize it was a dream. It leaves me with a profound sense of discomfort, a lingering unease that never truly goes away. I do not really have anyone to discuss this with, as my boyfriend's family does not believe in the paranormal. But I just really want to speak about it with someone, because otherwise, I feel as though I am going crazy. About 6 months ago, I received a package in the mail containing a doll I had purchased from an online auction site. I had no idea whether this object was genuinely possessed, but the previous owner had included a note detailing several distressing experiences she claimed to have had after acquiring it from a garage sale. She wrote that it had once violently smashed into her dining room set while she was in the bathroom doing her hair. She had walked out, carrying a bag, fully expecting to find evidence of a break-in, only to discover not a single sign of anybody or anything. The diningware and table were untouched, a disturbing lack of explanation for the commotion. Her next experience, she wrote, occurred as she was getting ready for bed. She heard a distinct noise coming from behind the chair where the doll was sitting. Turning, she claimed to see a dark figure with piercing red eyes, glaring at her with intense anger. Anyway, that was her story. Now, to my own ownership. When I received the doll, I was fully aware that a supposedly possessed object might not immediately show signs of activity. Such phenomena could take anywhere from a few hours to several months to manifest after being relocated to a new environment. For a long time, I never experienced anything out of the ordinary. I simply let the doll sit on a shelf, gathering dust, only remembering its physical presence in my house every once in a great while. These thoughts would surface randomly, even when I was doing something completely unrelated or busy elsewhere in the house. A few days ago, I had lit a burn pile in my backyard, intending to get rid of a large stack of branches and logs. For some inexplicable reason, a sudden powerful idea popped into my head. I should grab the doll and burn it, to be done with it once and for all. I walked back inside to retrieve it, and as soon as my fingers brushed against its fabric, my heart began to pound furiously. The sensation of my heartbeat intensified with every step I took towards my back door. I finally made it outside to the roaring fire and, without hesitation, tossed the doll into the flames. It landed in the center of the pyre. Within seconds, it began to smoke. As soon as the first tendrils of smoke rose, the frantic racing of my heart abruptly stopped, and a profound sense of relaxation washed over me. 30 seconds later, its hair and clothes were engulfed in full flames. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as it began to transform, looking like something directly out of a horror movie. The eyes, seemingly made of ceramic, melted and sank deeper into its head. The entire doll was rapidly converted into a charred, black soot until nothing but the hardened head, arms, and legs remained, grotesque and unsettling. I allowed the fire to keep burning until all the wood had been consumed, turning into ashes. My main question here, one that still plagues my thoughts, is whether or not it was truly a good idea to burn a supposedly possessed object. If it was not, I truly do not want to think about the potential repercussions. I often wonder what others might think about my decision to set the thing alight. This particular period of my life began as something incredibly positive, a refreshing change from a previous, unsettling experience. After moving out of a house where there had been an incident involving dark, unexplained magic, my family was relocated to government quarters within a society that was exclusively for the families of individuals working in the forest department. It was a cheerful place, a stark contrast to our last residence. There were many children around my age, a vibrant community of playmates. My school was conveniently close, and it was a well-knit neighborhood filled with friendly people. So much so that I felt comfortable trespassing into anyone's house, and they genuinely did not mind. It was, in many ways, one of the best places I had ever lived, primarily because it felt incredibly adventurous. The area was surrounded by tall, imposing shocker trees and many traditional, rustic houses dotted the landscape, lending the place an aura that was hard to beat. This place had an old-world charm, a sense of history and simplicity. The only truly unconventional part about the entire place was our house itself. It was, from what we could gather, probably built during the British Indian era, possessing a unique architectural style. The front hall had a flat roof, while the middle portion of the house was dramatically raised in a dome shape. And at the very end, near the washroom and beyond, there was no roof at all, leaving that section open to the sky. The first time we entered, we were greeted by many bizarre wall paintings in the middle. Dumb portion, images that we simply could not comprehend. There were 2 doors for entry, the main front one and another at the very back that opened directly in front of a fence, beyond which lay the deep forest. Across from that back door, a blackened, dead tree stood sentinel, a victim of a past lightning strike. We also had a beautiful garden adjacent to the house, flourishing with lemon and custard apple trees. At the far end of the garden was our storehouse. We did not know who had lived there before us. The caretaker did not tell us much, only that the previous person had moved somewhere else. Still, we did not want to take any risks, and so we had a holy ritual performed on the property before we officially moved in. It was an interesting place, full of new experiences. I made new friends quickly, and we would spend our entire days after school playing in the society compound. The forest office was located within the society itself, near the main gate. The entire area was surrounded by rocky terrains and dense forest. As children, we explored a great deal, venturing into the natural landscape. I often saw soldiers from a nearby farm marching around behind the rocky terrains. There was also another forest office building within the compound, an old structure that was permanently closed. It was locked, and this old office, almost directly in front of my house at a diagonal distance, was built on an elevated stage. It had high, imposing walls and a rotting, decaying structure. It was home to many mossy outgrowths, and like a part of our house, it had no roof either. On either side of it stood a burnt house, long abandoned. Nobody ever ventured into those places. The local temple priest and his wife had instructed everyone to stay away, explaining that there was a black dog that lived there, one that had gone mad. We usually obeyed these warnings, especially since the area was near the forest. Poisonous snakes and monkeys were a daily sight, and we had grown quite accustomed to their presence. The monkeys, in particular, would arrive every evening around 5 o'clock, and I recall some truly funny incidents involving them. One day, we were playing cricket near the old office when an older boy hit an aerial shot towards the building. Since there was no roof, the ball sailed directly inside. I was naturally sent to retrieve it. I carefully climbed on the edges of bricks that jutted out of the terrain adjoining the office and entered from above. It was a very creepy place inside, with a deadening, black smell permeating the air. I found some bones lying in the trash, probably left behind by dogs. I quickly retrieved the ball, came out, and went about my business, but something felt subtly off about the experience. The next day, in the morning, my mother approached us as we were discussing some recent news. She had had a vivid dream the previous night. In her dream, she saw a lot of buried treasure hidden in our house, specifically in the back wall of our storehouse. And there was also a voice, a guardian voice, protecting it. She saw someone digging there in her dream, a faceless man. Intrigued and a little unnerved, we all went into the garden and opened the storehouse. And indeed, the back wall had clearly been tampered with. It had been put up again, clearly indicating that someone had tried to break it down. It was unpainted, mere bricks and cement, albeit much thicker than the other walls. My mother did not proceed further. She explained that she heard the voice in her dream saying that to acquire the gold, one had to sacrifice their children, and that it could not be escaped or bargained with. She was not willing to take such a chance. We went back inside. A few minutes later, we heard someone at the door. It was our neighbor, who lived quite far in front, near the main gate, adjacent to the new office. He had walked all the way down to our place, and it was still quite early in the morning. It was a bit surprising because we did not have much interaction with him. He had a confused expression on his face, and he saw my mother and aunt, and then said, "You'll find this funny, but I had a dream about your house." He then proceeded to tell us the exact same dream that my mother had described, even specifying the same location for the treasure. It was incredibly strange. As we were all talking, another girl from the neighborhood walked towards us. She lived near the rocky terrain, and to our utter surprise, even she had experienced the very same dream. Everyone now wanted us to investigate, to dig up the treasure, but my mother was in no mood to pursue it further. One thing she did want to do, however, was to learn more about the history of the place. The caretaker was questioned once more, and this time he revealed more. He explained that the person who lived there before us was of Anglo-Indian descent. He had lived here some 22 years back and was known as a treasure explorer. He knew of the treasure in this place and had indeed tried to search for it. It was said that he had even sacrificed his own son to acquire the wealth, but was ultimately unable to bear the immense guilt. He had gone completely mad and then disappeared. The broken wall, the caretaker said, was put up by someone at night on the very day he disappeared. No one had seen who did it. The man, he revealed, had murdered his son right in front of our washroom, in that last section of the house that opened near the forest. This revelation sent shudders down my spine. There were frequent power cuts in those days, especially at night, and I used to take long showers at midnight in that very washroom. The idea of something lurking and guarding the walls, of a hidden treasure with such a gruesome history, was enough to give me profound chills. We mutually decided to do nothing about it, to leave the past undisturbed. Later that year, my family moved away from the town. My boyfriend's grandfather is a passionate antique collector, and among his many interests are dolls, porcelain ones to be exact. A few weeks ago, he acquired a new addition to his collection. The previous owners, in parting with it, advised him to be extremely careful, stating simply that it was special. Completely unfazed by this enigmatic warning, he did not press for any further questions, simply bringing the doll home with him. For the first 3 days, everything was perfectly normal. The doll sat in the kitchen, a new, inanimate addition to the household decor. The following day, my boyfriend and I were lying in our bedroom, which was down the hall, simply talking. It was around midnight when, suddenly, 3 soft, distinct sounds were heard from the other side of our door. We looked at each other, and then, from beyond the door, I heard his grandfather's voice call out his name. I got up and opened the door, while my boyfriend began to prepare himself for whatever task his grandfather had in store for him. Upon opening the door, I fully expected to be brought face to face with him, but no one was there. I closed the door, shrugging it off as a strange occurrence. But after I closed the door, I clearly heard distinct footsteps moving from down the hall. I went out to investigate, but in the distance, I could hear both grandparents snoring soundly in their own room. The following day, around the same time, all power to the house was inexplicably lost. It did not return until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Thankfully, throughout that entire night, one lamp somehow remained lit. I do not know how, but occasionally it would flicker out. But for the most part, it mysteriously continued to be powered. A few more nights passed without anything out of the ordinary happening. Then, just a few nights ago, all through the night, there were screams. These were not screams from inside the house, but from directly outside, piercing the darkness. Last night, at around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I was lying down, watching videos on my phone, when my boyfriend suddenly sat straight up. He began to ramble, speaking gibberish mixed with what sounded like numbers. I immediately asked him what was wrong, but he simply replied that he was okay. Then, he looked me dead in the eyes, screamed, and threw himself back onto the bed, resuming his snoring. I asked him about it earlier today, but he has absolutely no memory of the event. His grandfather is taking the doll to his antique shop tomorrow, and we are all desperately hoping that things will return to normal once it is out of the house. Since he took it out of the house and placed it in his antique shop, the air within our home has felt noticeably heavy. Everyone has also become easily irritated, which is unusual for our family. Normally, they are upbeat and possess an attitude of being able to conquer anything. I have also had a few hyper-realistic dreams lately. In one, I was drowning, completely consumed by water. In another, I was burned alive, the sensation of flames searing my skin. A third dream involved being pulled apart, limb from limb. And in yet another, I was captured and shown my new face, only I did not have one. Instead, a tall man stood there saying, "Look at the beauty I have created." It is unsettling to say the very least. My flatmates and I moved into a truly gorgeous house about 2 months ago. It felt like a fresh start, a beautiful new home. Roughly 2 weeks after settling in, we started hearing distinct footsteps in the hall and on the front porch. We are in close proximity to our neighbors, but I highly doubt it is them we are hearing at 3, 4, and 5 o'clock in the morning. The timing and nature of the sounds feel far too deliberate. Ever since moving in, I have also developed a pervasive feeling of being watched, especially when I am in the shower, a deeply unsettling sensation. Just over 2 weeks ago, I was lying in bed, watching videos on my phone, when I distinctly felt something tugging at my charger cable. We do not have any pets, so there was no logical explanation for this. Ever since that incident, things have gotten progressively worse, specifically for me. I frequently hear muffled voices outside my room at night. I have checked on plenty of occasions, and there is never anyone there, nor can I hear anything from the neighbors. On nights when I find myself home alone, meaning without my boyfriend present, I tend to have quite explicit dreams, though never involving my boyfriend. I always wake up from these dreams feeling an intense sense of guilt. If I'm at my boyfriend's place, however, my dreams are consistently about being chased, or navigating messed up houses filled with traps and the terrifying inability to escape. When I am at home, I frequently wake up with unexplained bruises on my body, marks that were absolutely not there before I went to bed. I have had one on my inner thigh and several blotches of bruising on my upper arms. I know I can be clumsy at times, but I also know when I have hurt myself, and these marks appear without any memory of an injury. I pulled out an old laptop just over a week ago to do some work for a website that is launching soon. As I worked, I clearly saw someone's head and shoulders peeking around the corner from the dining room at about 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Only one of my flatmates was awake at that hour, so I asked if it were him, and he confirmed it was not. Last week, I went to pull the lounge curtains because there was an annoying glare on the television. I had left my bedroom door open to air out the room, as I had been away for a few days. As I moved through the lounge, I saw the palm of an androgynous hand waving at me from the doorway of my room. I immediately told my flatmate, and he, intrigued, said he would check it out with me. We stepped into my room, and we were instantly enveloped by a profound coldness. Our breath fogged in the air, despite it being inside. It no longer felt like my room. It simply felt wrong, permeated by an oppressive chill. That night, deeply unsettled, I decided I would sleep on the couch in the lounge. But at roughly 5 o'clock in the morning, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I clearly heard something tapping at the keyboard of one of our computers. All our computers are in the lounge, as it is a shared space to ensure we see each other given our differing work schedules. I was the only person there, and as previously mentioned, we do not own any pets. My computer was off, so I could not see anything on the screen. However, it had been staying on at night recently, with a blank document open, despite being turned off. All of these occurrences mean I am having a lot of trouble sleeping. And just now, as I write this, I heard 4 rather heavy sounds at the window. I really do not want to look, and I'm not going to. I know there is something profoundly wrong in this house. The strange occurrences in this new house have continued, and in some respects, are picking up pace. The other day, I left my phone on my desk while I went to the bathroom. When I returned, I noticed that my phone was half removed from its faceplate. Everyone else in the flat was either asleep or at work at this point, as most of us work night shifts. About a week later, I had gone out the front door for a cigarette. There was a pretty decent storm blowing, and the backyard offered no protection from the southerly winds. I had locked the door behind me when I came back inside, as I was the only person home. Just over an hour later, I distinctly heard the front door open and then close. I immediately went out to greet whichever flatmate I thought had come home, thinking someone had finished work early. But I could not find anyone in the house, and the front door, which I had locked, was now unlocked. About 4:30 the following morning, I was sitting at my computer in the lounge when my right shoulder suddenly became very cold. I glanced sideways at my shoulder and almost immediately noticed that a single strand of my hair was bouncing up and down, almost as if someone was gently pulling a pig's tail, a delicate but unnerving sensation. I spent a few weeks away from home recently, and last night was my first night back in the house. At 1 o'clock in the morning today, I went to the bathroom before going to bed. As I pushed open the bathroom door, I saw a black, shadowy figure standing by the window. I thought nothing of it at first, as I was half asleep. But as I went to sit down, I noticed that the bathroom scales were going through their tearing process, zeroing out. These are electric scales and require a person to step on them to turn on. Moreover, ever since we moved, they have to be lifted slightly for them to register that you want to use them. After questioning the flatmates who were home at the time, I found that no one had been in that bathroom before me. And seeing that I use the scales regularly, I know that they only stay on for about 30 seconds after use, or 15 seconds if not being used after an initial lift. After rising at midday today, I went to the restroom, then decided I would shower as I needed to wash my hair for the weekend. I went to get my towels and hairbrush from the sleepout, a separate small building, and when I came back, I went to turn the door handle to quietly close the bathroom door behind me, so as not to wake up my flatmate in the next room who was sleeping after his graveyard shift, only to discover that the bathroom door had been locked from the inside. I was incredibly thankful that I had not completely shut the door behind me, not even 5 minutes previously. Seeing as it was only he and I home, I had not worried about locking the door while using the restroom or while showering. And also while I was showering, I noticed that a leg to the onesie that was hanging on the back of the door was sort of jerking around at odd intervals. But none of the towels or my gowns, which were also hanging on the door, had been moved at all. The weird dreams are still happening, albeit less frequently, while I was at my sister's place. This house, still feels terrible. I sleep with my light on and documentaries playing on YouTube on my phone, a constant source of background noise to ward off the silence. But thankfully, I have not woken up with any new bruises in the last few weeks. This happened about 12 years ago, when I was around 11 years old. It was the day after Christmas, and my mom, my stepdad, and I were sitting in the living room, simply watching television. It was past 9 o'clock in the evening, and my little brother had already gone to bed. Now, my brother and I had both received remote-controlled cars for Christmas. These were the kind that had rechargeable batteries in both the car itself and its remote controller. As we were watching television, my car, which had been left in the middle of the living room floor, suddenly started making a noise as if it had turned itself on. At this point, all three of us looked at it, our eyes wide with disbelief. We then watched, in utter amazement, as it drove around in circles twice, executed a perfect three-point turn, and then parked itself neatly against the wall. We all just kind of looked at each other, stunned into silence. My mom, recovering first, went to check on my brother, as he was supposed to be fast asleep in his bed. She returned looking a bit concerned, confirming that my brother was indeed, flat out, asleep. She explained that when he truly slept, he really slept, and there was no faking the loud, distinctive snores he produced. She then asked my stepdad and me if we were playing a prank. We both immediately denied it. My stepdad even pointed out that the controllers for both cars had been left on the side table, exactly where my brother and I had left them after playing with them earlier in the evening. My mom, still skeptical, proceeded to check both controllers and the cars themselves for batteries. To our collective astonishment, all the batteries were removed from both the cars and their remotes. They were in the charging docks, plugged into the wall. We had, in fact, completely run the batteries out while playing with the cars earlier that day. My mom, my brother, and I had experienced some other strange things in that house over time. But this was by far the strangest, most inexplicable incident I have ever personally witnessed. I simply cannot think of any logical explanation for it. I have always thought, perhaps, that it was a ghost, an unseen presence with a mischievous, or perhaps simply curious nature. The memory remains vivid and unsettling to this day. My girlfriend and I are both university students, and we live in a relatively old apartment building in the town of St. Cloud, Minnesota. The building was constructed sometime around the 1970s, and while it is generally a nice place to live, something about it gives off an extremely eerie feeling, almost a dark, heavy presence. However, since the rent is cheap and it is conveniently close to campus, we decided to move in anyway. Let me preface this by saying that we live on the second floor of the building and have neighbors both above and below us. We have never actually met our neighbors, oddly enough, but we simply assumed they were just older, quiet residents. My girlfriend and I are both firm believers in the paranormal and have always been quite curious about it. My girlfriend has never personally experienced anything paranormal firsthand, but for me, I have seen odd things throughout my life that I simply cannot explain, and this particular experience happens to be one of them. This story begins like any normal night. We had just finished moving in and unpacking our belongings, and we decided to take a break and relax for the rest of the evening. We were watching a movie on a streaming service when we paused it for a moment. That is when we started to hear a loud, distinct banging sound directly above us. A rhythmic noise, almost as if someone were constantly picking up and dropping heavy objects. We looked at each other, and my girlfriend suggested, maybe someone's moving in upstairs. We did not immediately jump to paranormal conclusions, so we simply ignored it. A few days went by, and the banging started to occur around the same time it did the first night. For some reason, we were not particularly creeped out or anything like that. We just thought that perhaps this was the only time the people above us could move in. Maybe they got off work at that hour. Later on the same night, while getting ready for bed, we heard unusually loud footsteps from upstairs. They sounded heavy, as if someone were wearing steel-toed boots and purposely stomping their feet against the ground. Then, as we lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, we all of a sudden heard a blood-curdling scream coming from a female voice upstairs. It was so incredibly loud that we could have sworn it was coming from right beside us. We both jolted upright, our faces pale with terror. we were absolutely terrified. Our first instinct was to call the police, but after a moment, we decided against it. Perhaps we thought it was just a particularly intense movie they were watching, but it was just too loud, too raw, to be a mere movie sound effect. One morning, I was in the bathroom, getting ready to go to work, when I heard a faint crying sound coming from the same female voice. It sounded as if she were crying in the bathtub or somewhere very near the bathroom, as the sound was directly above me. I then heard doors slamming and drawers constantly opening and closing, a flurry of agitated activity. The sounds went on for another few minutes, and then, all of a sudden, it was dead silent. My girlfriend was not around at the time, but she still believed my account when I told her. Since then, there have been no sounds of movement, no crying, no screaming. It has been completely silent for a few days now from upstairs. The next week, my girlfriend and I decided to go to the front desk of the apartment building and tell them about the strange sounds we had been hearing in our apartment. The reception lady listened to us, her expression confused, and then began to hesitantly tell us that no one had moved into the apartment above ours. She explained that it had not had a tenant in over 2 years. Unfounded by this, we asked if anyone could have broken in and caused the sounds. The lady reassured us that if someone were to break into the apartment, the alarm system would immediately go off, alerting both local authorities and the building security. But, she confirmed, they had never had any alarms go off in that unit, nor had we heard any during our stay. We could not help but wonder what was truly going on up there. We decided to conduct our own investigation, doing some research at the local library in town. I did not find anything that mentioned a murder having occurred in or around the area we lived in. To this day, I am still trying to find answers, trying to make sense of what we experienced. We do still hear these unsettling sounds on occasion, but knowing that absolutely no one lives up there just creeps us out even more. We do not know what to do, and we cannot break our lease. It is the middle of the semester, and some days we are simply too scared to even step foot in that apartment building. The thought of what lurks above, unseen and unexplained, is a constant source of dread. My grandmother, on my mother's side, was always considered to be the crazy one in our family, long before I was even born. Her marriage to my mother's father had reportedly failed largely because my grandmother was far too interested in what his very Catholic family deemed witchcraft. My grandmother, for instance, had a deep fascination with astrology, a practice that, to her husband's traditional relatives, was clearly linked to the occult. As I was growing up, she used to tell me vivid stories about the tiny fairies that she claimed lived in her garden. She would also warn me, with a serious expression, that I should never, ever leave my shoes outside at night, for the gnomes might steal them. As any child of the 1990s, I was completely enchanted by Disney movies, so all of Grandma's fantastical stories seemed to be just that, delightful tales. There were always specific rules to being at Grandma's house, and most certainly, they were not your typical household regulations. Things like, leave the windows open at night so the frogs can come in, or be sure not to step on any of the frogs, they are special. Or, if you bake something delicious, you absolutely must leave a small piece for the fairies or things will start to go missing. Odd rules, to be sure, but as a kid, it was all a part of the fun, an eccentric adventure. Now, my grandmother was also an extreme hoarder, and she had been for my entire life. She was the type of person who had a narrow trail from one end of her house to the other, every other surface piled high with objects, stacked from floor to ceiling. She never hoarded trash, though. It was always useful things, just things she was probably never going to use herself, but felt she needed to have just in case. And food, oh Lord, that woman hoarded food like no other. My grandmother had grown up during the Great Depression, a time of immense hardship and uncertainty, constantly having to move around and leave everything she owned behind each time. Once she grew up and was able to create her own stability, she started hoarding. My mother says my grandmother started this behavior when my mother was a teenager and never stopped. Most of the items she would collect came from thrift stores, flea markets, garage sales, and pretty much any source of unwanted secondhand items. Something else I feel is important to mention. I am the youngest of 3 children. My 2 older siblings are my half-siblings. My sister and I shared the same father, and my brother and I shared the same mother. My brother was around 4 or 5 years old when my parents met, meaning I was not my grandmother's first grandchild. However, I was the only one she seemed to like. My siblings were never invited to her house, nor were they really welcome to be there at all. My grandmother treated my siblings as though they simply did not exist. Me, on the other hand, she would call my parents constantly to ask when we were going to be in the valley next, and if they would be able to bring me to her house to spend the weekend. Neither of my other siblings ever stayed the night at Grandma's house. I feel as though the above information is important context for why I am sharing this particular experience. I was 13 at the time I brought him home. I had spent a weekend with that grandmother while my parents were staying at another relative's house not far from there. This was pretty normal. As stated before, I seemed to be the only family member she truly favored. That weekend, my grandmother gave me a music box porcelain doll. I collected porcelain dolls, so I did not think anything unusual of it. The fact that she was simply giving me a new one felt perfectly normal. She told me to take care of him, that he's very special, and I needed to be sure to give him the love and attention he deserves. I was specifically instructed to wing and play him at least once a month. Okay, whatever you say, Grandma, I thought at the time. My mother and her mother eventually had a serious falling out, the details of which I still do not know to this day. I was told that if I wanted to see her or speak to her, I would have to find my own way of doing so. As far as my mother was concerned, my grandmother was effectively dead to our family. There is a whole lot that happened between the time period of 13 to 18 years old. The strangest of them all occurred when I was 15. I had to have emergency neck surgery. A mass had appeared and started cutting off blood flow to my brain. If I had not gone to the hospital for my neck being sore, I could certainly have died. Fast forward to Mother's Day of 2011. I am 18 years old at the time. Every 4 years or so, my grandmother's birthday would coincidentally fall on Mother's Day, and it did so on that particular day. I had not spoken to her for a few years at that point, since I was not allowed to use the house phone to contact her, and for the longest time, no one would give me her phone number. But that day, I managed to get her number and called her. The conversation went something like this. Hey, Grandma, it's me. I just wanted to call you to wish you a happy birthday and Mother's Day. Do you have anything special going on? Oh, goodness. I thought I'd never get to speak to you again. I'm surprised that expletive mother of yours let you call me. Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't called sooner, but I've really missed you, Grandma. How would you feel about me making a trip up there to see you soon? Oh, that would be wonderful. We can finally talk about all the things your mother has been hiding from you. She's been lying to you your whole life about who you really are. Don't deny it. Embrace it. You need to confront your mother and demand she tell you what she's been keeping from you. Oh, okay, Grandma. So, what do you think of me coming to see you soon? I'd really like to catch up with you. I've missed you so much. Do you think you can come to my high school graduation next month? Ah, yes. You should definitely come see me. Can you come this next weekend? No, I don't think I can, but I'll try. After a very long silence, she asked, Do you still have him? Who, the jester? I asked, confused. Yeah, I do. Why? Bring him with you. Oh, all right, Grandma. Well, I'll have to go soon because I'm making dinner tonight, but I love you and I'll call you again soon. I attempted to call her again a few weeks later to see if she could attend my graduation. She did not answer. My other phone calls over the next few months also went unanswered. She passed away that December. Which brings me to my whole point of this post. The doll she gave me. I have had it for 10 years now. I have had a lot of unexplainable experiences that I prefer to keep private, but I would be willing to share those more on a one-to-one basis if they could possibly help. But as far as the noticeable activity that my partner and I have witnessed, they are as follows. Night terrors begin if the doll is not in our bedroom or sleeping space. These are the absolute worst night terrors I have ever experienced. Things go missing and then turn up in places they absolutely should not have been. The doll will go through months of sitting alone on a shelf, not being wound or played, but will consistently play single notes or small parts of its song on its own. And then there is our new dog. He cannot stand it. He will wake up from a dead sleep and start barking and growling like crazy at it. I even have a video of him doing so. I have depression, and I often think back to when I first started to feel the way I do. It was around the time the doll came into my life. I guess what I am getting at is, I need help figuring out if there really is something going on, or if I'm just crazy. I need help to bring him and myself to peace again. There's a whole lot more that I wanted to say, but have not been able to, and I would be more than willing to talk to someone if they think they can help. And please, do not recommend sage. You do not think I have tried that? When I was around 8 years old, my family moved into a house that I can only describe now as cursed. From the outside, it didn't look like much. Just an old, weather-beaten place at the end of a quiet road. It was the kind of house you'd expect to find in an older neighborhood, with fading white paint, missing shingles, and crooked porch steps. My parents saw it as a project, a fixer-upper, something affordable during hard times. But I felt something wrong the moment we stepped inside. The air was heavy, almost damp, and everything about the place felt tired. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips. The floorboards creaked no matter where you walked, and the ceilings bore long brown stains that told of old, unresolved leaks. My room was small, with one window that looked out into a dense row of trees. I remember not wanting to sleep in there the first night. I felt watched. As weeks passed, the unease only grew. We learned from a neighbor that the entire area had once been a First Nation camp, long before any houses were built. Over 100 years ago, a massive landslide had swept down the hill behind our street, burying the land and many people beneath it. Later, the town expanded, and houses, shops, even a small baseball stadium were built directly over what was essentially an ancient burial ground. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but now, looking back, it explains a lot. Almost immediately, the house began to act strangely. Doors would slam shut by themselves, even when no windows were open. At first, we thought it was drafts, old hinges, or just the creaking of a warped house. But then, things escalated. One afternoon, I heard a crash from upstairs. I ran to find my dad sitting on the hallway floor, dazed. He said something had thrown him, physically thrown him, across the hall. There were no tripping hazards, nothing to fall over. It was as if something invisible had lifted him and hurled him into the wall. The basement, though, was the worst. The door to it had a chain lock on the outside, as if someone had once tried to keep something in. I hated walking past it. Even during the day, it gave off a deep, sinking fear. The kind that rises in your stomach and crawls up your throat, making it hard to breathe. I avoided it whenever I could, but one day, I tried to face the fear. My mom was in the bath upstairs, and I thought maybe if I just closed the basement door, that horrible feeling would stop. I slowly pulled the door shut. The chain clinked softly as I fastened it, and I stood there for a moment, relieved. But before I could step away, the door slammed open with tremendous force. slamming into my face. I staggered backward, bleeding from the lip, my nose sore. There was no wind, no one on the other side. Just the basement, gaping open again, waiting. That was just one of many terrifying things. Lights would flicker for no reason. We'd hear knocks on the walls at night. Cold spots would appear suddenly, even during summer. Our pets refused to go near certain rooms, especially near the basement door. Sometimes, we'd all wake up to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate, but nobody would be there. Eventually, after months of fear and confusion, my parents made the decision to move. We packed in a hurry. The day before we left, my dad and sister decided to finally look behind the drywall in the basement. He had always been curious about the oddly shaped wall panels and suspected it might be covering something. What they found made my blood run cold. Behind the wall, painted in black and red symbols, were markings that I would later learn were satanic. Dozens of them. Circles, crosses, strange runes I couldn't read. There were bones in the corners, possibly animal remains, and stains on the floor that looked like old, dried blood. The air in that room was almost suffocating. A foul, rotting stench filled the space, as if the very walls were exhaling. One of the walls bore a crude message, painted in thick black strokes. Passageway to hell. We stood there in silence, the weight of what had been hiding beneath our home settling in like concrete. My dad didn't say a word as he covered it back up, but I could tell from his face that he was shaken to his core. Later, we found out through neighbors and some digging that the previous tenants had been part of a local satanic group. They used the basement for rituals, and somehow, unbelievably, the landlord knew. He had chosen not to tell us. He had covered up the walls and rented it out like nothing had happened. We moved out immediately. I don't remember packing or saying goodbye to the house. I just remember the overwhelming urge to get as far away from it as possible. But even after we left, the feeling didn't leave me. It followed us. I began having nightmares. Not the usual ones kids have, but vivid dreams of being pulled into the ground, buried alive beneath dirt and stone, surrounded by whispers in a language I couldn't understand. I'd wake up and sweat, sometimes screaming. My sister said she had similar dreams. My dad became withdrawn, quieter than usual. He would jump at small noises and refuse to speak about the house. We all knew something had changed in us. I began to wonder if the house hadn't just been haunted, but if something in it had attached itself to us. Something that didn't stay behind when we closed the door for the last time. Even now, years later, strange things still happen to us. Unexplained sounds, fleeting shadows, that cold, crawling feeling of being watched. It doesn't matter where we go. No matter how many times we move, there are always moments to take me back to that house. To the cold basement, the slamming door, the symbols on the wall. I don't talk about it much. Most people wouldn't believe me. Sometimes I don't even believe myself. But then the lights flicker, or I hear a whisper where there should be silence, ... and I remember. Something was in that house, and I don't think it ever really let us go. I was 11 the first time I realized something was wrong. Something deeply, invisibly wrong that I couldn't quite explain. It started with a simple, everyday task. I had been looking for my shoes and wandered into the basement where we kept a lot of our things. The room was cool and dim, smelling faintly of damp concrete and old cardboard. I crouched in front of a cupboard wedged under the stairs, thinking my sneakers might have been tossed in there. The moment I pulled the door open, I felt it, an icy breath across the back of my neck. Not like a draft or a gust, but warm, moist, undeniably human. And then came the voice. Thank you. It was low and male, so close it felt like lips could have brushed my ear. I froze, my heart knocking around inside my ribs, breath caught halfway in my throat. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there, staring into that old cupboard filled with clutter, the cold breath already fading, leaving behind a silence that rang in my ears. I didn't find my shoes that day. That same year, a few months later, something even stranger happened. My dad and I were up late. It was close to 1 a.m, and we were both in the kitchen. He couldn't sleep, and I was just tagging along, enjoying the stillness of the night. The kitchen light was dim, and we spoke quietly, mostly just exchanging fragments of conversation. Then he stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened, his body went rigid. His face twisted into something I had never seen before, pure terror. His eyes locked onto something behind me, something I couldn't see, and he didn't blink. It wasn't like he was startled or spooked. It was something deeper. His expression was so raw and real that I instinctively stepped away from him, as if whatever he was looking at might reach me too. And then it got cold. Not a drop in temperature kind of cold. It was like walking into a freezer, sharp, sudden, and wrong. The air felt heavier. I'm not a religious person. My family never really was either. But something about that moment, about the look on my dad's face and the unnatural weight in the air, made me stop praying without thinking. I began silently mouthing the words to the Father, the only prayer I knew well enough to recite. I didn't want to make it obvious. I didn't want to scare him further. So I kept it to myself, silent and hidden, barely moving my lips. After a few minutes that felt like hours, my dad finally blinked and turned toward me. His face was pale, and tears clung to the corners of his eyes. He looked exhausted, like whatever he'd been looking at had drained him completely. He opened his mouth and said, "I don't know what you said, but you saved us." I didn't ask what he'd seen. Something about the way he looked told me I wouldn't want to know. He never brought it up again, no matter how many times I asked. To this day, he refuses to talk about that night. I've only seen him cry that once in my life. When my parents split, my dad got a small apartment on the other side of town. It was supposed to be a fresh start, something lighter, calmer, quieter, but it wasn't. I visited him during the holidays. The apartment felt off the moment I walked in. It wasn't anything you could point to, just that subtle sense that something else was sharing the space. Things would move, small stuff, like keys or a lighter. We'd hear faint noises, little knocks and taps, the kind you could write off if they weren't so frequent or so perfectly timed to our conversations. One evening, my dad and I were sitting at the kitchen table, talking. We had just heard something like a thump from the direction of the stove. We both turned, expecting to see something had fallen or maybe shifted. Nothing had. The kitchen was still. Then, without warning, both salt shakers flew off the stove. Not fell. Flew. One of them hit the wall with a sharp crack. The other hit the floor and rolled under a cabinet. My dad didn't even flinch. He just sat there for a long moment and said, "It's back." We never really needed to explain what it was. We both just knew. One thing we began to notice was that none of this ever happened around my mother. Ever. She could walk into a room that had felt thick with tension moments before, and instantly the air would clear. My younger brother, he's 9 now, also seems untouched by all of it. Nothing ever happens to him. It's just me, my dad, and my older sister, who's 26. My sister once saw a psychic, not something any of us usually take seriously. But this one, she said, told her something strange. That her late boyfriend, who had died in an accident, was still attached to her. But that wasn't all. The psychic claimed there was something else, something darker, clinging to her as well. That struck a chord. We started to put the pieces together, and the only conclusion that made sense, if any of this could be said to make sense, was that something had followed us. That whatever was in that house where it all began hadn't just haunted the place, it had attached itself to us. If I tried to think back to when this really started, when it really felt like something had claimed us, it was that moment in the basement when I was 11. That voice. That breath. That thank you. It felt like the beginning of a connection, one I never asked for. Now, at 17, I still think about it. I still feel it. I sometimes wonder if things would have been different if I hadn't opened that cupboard, if I hadn't acknowledged whatever presence was down there with me. But I did. And I think that acknowledgement was all it needed. To this day, I don't know exactly what it is that's followed us. It doesn't always show itself in big ways. Sometimes it's subtle. A shadow in the corner of the room, a sudden cold draft, the feeling that you're being watched even when you're alone. And other times, it's not subtle at all. But no matter how many times we move, no matter how many times we try to ignore it or rationalize it away, it always finds us again. Like it's waiting, like it's watching, like it believes we belong to it. When I was 13, things took a darker turn. That was the year my mom, my little brother, and I moved in with one of her old friends. She had known him since high school, someone she trusted enough to share a home with. His house wasn't creepy on the surface, just a regular, older place with creaky floors and mismatched paint. Nothing about it suggested it would become another chapter in this strange thread of my life. But almost right away, the weirdness returned. And this time, it focused only on me. My dad and sister, who had always been the other two that experienced these things with me, were no longer around. My mom and little brother, who seemed completely untouched by all of this before, remained just as unaffected now. But the strange things didn't stop. If anything, they started intensifying. It was like, with no one else around who could sense or be affected by whatever this was, I had its full attention. One of the first things that happened in the new house still haunts me in its simplicity. I was home alone, standing in the kitchen. It was quiet, middle of the afternoon, just me and the soft hum of the fridge. I wasn't scared, had no reason to be. I remember I was making a snack. I reached for a fork from the drawer, then turned my back to grab something from the fridge. That's when I heard it. A sharp clang. I spun around. A fork had just flown across the room and struck the wall. Not slid off a counter. Not dropped. Flown. I heard the impact. I felt it hit the wall. I even remember the exact pitch of the metallic ring it made. But when I walked over to pick it up, it wasn't there. I searched. I got on my hands and knees, looked under the table, moved chairs, even opened drawers, in case I had somehow lost track of time and only imagined what had just happened. The fork was gone, completely vanished. I told myself it must have been a trick of the light or maybe a sound from outside. I wanted to believe that, but in my gut, I knew better. It wasn't just what had happened, it was how I had felt in the moment. A sudden chill in the air, that sense of being watched, like eyes were on the back of my neck. The moment passed, but the feeling lingered. Things got worse from there. It happened one night after I had gone to bed. I was exhausted. It had been a long day, school was stressful, and I just wanted to sleep. I climbed into bed, turned off the light, and settled under my blanket. That's when it hit me. That feeling, that thing. Sleep paralysis. It wasn't the first time I had experienced it, but this was different, worse, stronger. If you've ever had sleep paralysis, you know how terrifying it can be. You're awake, or at least your mind is, but your body refuses to respond. It feels like being trapped in your own skin, screaming inside while the outside stays perfectly still. This time, though, something new happened. Something terrifying. As I lay there, frozen, unable to move or cry out, I felt pressure on my feet. At first, it was light, like a cat walking across the blanket, but we didn't have pets in that house. Then it tightened. 2 firm grips locked around my ankles, and I felt myself being pulled. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was slow, deliberate. Inch by inch, my body began sliding down the bed. I could feel the sheets bunching beneath me, could hear the soft creak of the mattress springs as I was dragged downward. My chest filled with panic. My mind screamed, "Move!" But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, forced to feel everything. By the time I could finally twitch a finger, then a hand, and break free from the paralysis, my legs were already dangling off the end of the bed. My body was halfway over the edge. My shoulders had just barely caught on the mattress, stopping me from falling completely to the floor. It wasn't a dream. I know that with absolute certainty. There's no way I could have moved myself into that position without being fully awake and trying. It had pulled me. Whatever it was, there's no other explanation. I stayed up the rest of the night, lights on, huddled under a blanket, refusing to sleep. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't know how to. What was I supposed to say? That something invisible had dragged me off my bed in the middle of the night? That I had been awake and paralyzed and helpless? She wouldn't have believed me. She never had. Not really. But that event changed everything. It wasn't just the fear of being watched anymore. It wasn't even just the creepy sounds or the missing objects. It was physical now. It had touched me, moved me. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Small things started happening more often. Lights flickering for no reason. My phone randomly dying, even when it had battery. Whispers in the hallway I couldn't understand. One night, the mirror in the bathroom fogged up while I brushed my teeth, even though I hadn't used hot water. There was no writing or messages on it, nothing cliché, but it left me chilled all the same. The strange thing was that none of it happened when anyone else was around. Not once did my mom or brother see anything. It was only when I was alone, almost like it was waiting for those moments. I started to wonder, was it feeding off my fear? Or had it attached to me, in some way, the same way we thought it had followed my dad and sister? The dragging incident repeated itself once more months later. Not quite as extreme. This time, I wasn't fully paralyzed, just groggy and half asleep. I felt the blanket tug down, like someone was trying to uncover my legs. When I bolted upright, there was nothing in the room, but the blanket was halfway down the bed. Again, there was no explanation. It wasn't long before I refused to sleep in the dark. I started sleeping with lights on, sometimes even with the TV playing something just to have sound in the room. I kept crystals near my bed, the ones my sister had given me. Salt in a small bowl under the bed. I wasn't religious, but I would whisper small prayers before sleep, not because I believed in anything specific, but because something was better than nothing. I knew deep down that whatever this presence was, it didn't belong in that house, or any house. It didn't feel human, and it didn't feel random. I couldn't shake the feeling that it had chosen me for a reason. Why me? Was it because I acknowledged it that first time when I was 11? Was it because I kept sensing it while others around me didn't? Or maybe it was just that once you've been touched by something like this, you never really shake it. You carry it. Years have passed since that night, and I still remember the exact feeling of those cold hands on my ankles. I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, afraid I won't be able to move again. Because once it happens to you, once something drags you from your bed, you can never fully believe that you're safe. Not even in your own home. Not even in your own body. I was 15 when we moved into our current house. It was a small, somewhat older place, tucked into a quiet neighborhood that didn't seem like the type to hold on to bad energy. The paint on the walls was fresh, the carpets had been recently replaced, and sunlight poured into the living room during the day. For the first few months, it actually felt normal, like maybe, finally, we'd left everything behind. I remember thinking that the silence in the house felt different from the kind I'd grown used to. It wasn't tense or heavy. It wasn't the kind of quiet that made your ears strain for a sound you hoped wouldn't come. It was just peaceful. For a while at least. We should have known by then how this goes. Every time we moved, there was always a brief pause, like a grace period. As if whatever was following us had to find us again, settle in, and decide when to start making itself known. The calm before the storm. The first incident in this house was subtle, but unmistakable. I was standing in the living room, talking to my mom, when one of the framed pictures on the side table suddenly flew off the shelf. Not tipped over, not nudged by a draft, thrown. It arced across the room and hit the opposite wall, the glass shattering on impact. There were no pets in the room, no open windows, no movement besides us, and we were standing several feet away. My mom was startled, but she brushed it off quickly, muttering something about maybe it being unbalanced on the shelf. But I knew. The way it had launched, not fallen, was too deliberate. I didn't say anything. I just picked up the broken frame, swept the glass, and said nothing. I was used to this by now. Things stayed relatively quiet for a while after that, at least during the day. But the nights were a different story. It always started around the same time, 3:30 a.m. Every so often, when the house was dark and still, I would hear the piano start playing. The piano is in the living room, an old upright that belonged to my mom's friend, the same one we had lived with before. He'd passed away and left it to her, and though none of us played regularly, she had kept it more as a sentimental item. But at 3:30 in the morning, someone played it. Not just random notes. Full, intricate pieces, melodies that flowed like practice compositions. They were often soft, almost gentle at first, but unmistakably two-handed and coordinated. You don't forget the sound of someone playing both left and right-hand melodies. It wasn't something a cat could do, and even if it were a recording, the piano keys visibly moved. Sometimes it would last 30 seconds, other times a full 2 minutes. Then nothing. No footsteps, no creaks, just a sudden stop, like the unseen pianist had stood up and vanished. The first time it happened, I thought it must be my imagination, or maybe I'd left the TV on in another room. But I checked. Everything was off. I crept down the hall, barely breathing, and saw the piano just sitting there. Silent. The keys weren't moving anymore, but I could feel it. The air still carried that low hum of presence, the way a room feels after someone's left it. Not quite empty. It wasn't every night, but it was enough. I started writing down the time each time I heard it. It was always between 3:28 and 3:33 a.m. My mom and brother never heard it. Not once, I asked, subtly at first, then more directly. Did you hear anything last night? Do you remember anyone getting up around 3? Nothing. My brother, as always, slept peacefully through the night. My mom swore she hadn't heard a thing. So again, I kept it to myself. The last experience in this house that really cemented my belief, that proved to me this wasn't all in my head, was one I will never forget. It was late. I'd had a migraine that day, so I was lying in bed with the lights off, trying to block out any remaining light. I wasn't asleep. My eyes were closed, but I was fully awake, just trying to rest in the dark. That's when I felt it. Breath. Right on my face. Cold, steady, deliberate. I opened my eyes, and for a split second, the room seemed even darker than before, like the air had thickened. I couldn't move. I didn't want to. And then, a voice whispered, so close it felt like it was inside my head. It's mine. It was the same voice I had heard when I was 11. The same deep, male tone. Soft, almost calm, but with an edge that felt possessive. Not angry, not cruel, just certain. Like it had been waiting, quietly watching, until it knew the exact moment I was alone and vulnerable. I don't remember how long I laid there. I think I blacked out for a few minutes, because the next thing I knew, I was sitting up in bed with my heart pounding, drenched in sweat, the room silent again. That was the moment I stopped doubting. I remembered what the psychic had told my sister, that her late boyfriend was attached to her, but something else was with him. Something evil. At first, I wasn't sure I believed in that kind of language. Evil felt like a strong word. But after hearing that voice again, after all these years, I started to wonder. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a relationship. One I had never agreed to. I did what I could. I placed cups of salt in the corners of my room, something a friend, who is Aboriginal, had once told me could help cleanse a space. She also gave me crystals to place around the room. Black tourmaline, clear quartz, and smoky amethyst. I don't know if they worked, but they gave me something to do, a sense of control. That matters when you feel helpless. Since then, the piano still plays from time to time. The picture frames don't fly anymore, but sometimes I still feel that same breath on my skin, just as I'm about to drift off. A reminder. Whatever this is, it didn't stay in that first house. It didn't get left behind when we moved. It didn't care about walls or distance or logic. It's with us. Or maybe, more accurately, it's with me. I've started to believe that when I was 11 and opened that cupboard in the basement, I didn't just disturb something. I gave it permission. I acknowledged it. And it hasn't let go since. Now, look, this next part I am not proud of. I knew I was insanely stupid at the time, but in my defense, I was a kid, and kids sometimes do dumb things. A while after I heard the voice in my room, I went to a bonfire and was drinking, though only cool drinks. I had consumed a maximum of 3, and I was not drunk by any means. So, I went to my friend's house to sleep. She is First Nation and communicates with spirits through a Ouija board. She and my other friends wanted us to use one, and I stupidly agreed. The board answered us. I cannot remember exactly what was said, but I do distinctly remember her asking, "Do you like Allison?" And the board, through our hands, spelled out, "No." And then, when asked again, it spelled, "Yes." Around this exact time, my chest became very constricted, and I found it incredibly hard to breathe. I was hyperventilating and crying, and I felt like I could not get any air into my lungs. My friends told me that I had become freezing cold, and my pupils were completely unresponsive. They ended up calling an ambulance, who ruled it as a panic attack. But the thing is, while I do experience panic attacks and pretty bad anxiety, my panic attacks are profoundly different from that experience. I had been completely calm and not anxious whatsoever before the breathing difficulty began. So that leads us to what happened just a few days ago. I am pretty worried that the Ouija board session may cause this entity to get worse. Ever since I put salt in my room, nothing paranormal has happened in my bedroom, and so I began to feel safe in here, which I guess I should not have allowed myself to fall into that false sense of security. I was sitting on my bed, my head pressed against my window. I had my blinds closed and a blanket draped over my headboard so that no one could look into my room. That is when I heard something tap against the window. I heard it for a few minutes, a persistent, light rhythm. So, I turned around and looked out the window. At first, I saw nothing, but then there was something pressed up against the glass, clearly in the shape of a head. My light was on, so I could not make out any distinct features. But it seemed as though they were wearing a hood, and that it was deliberately hiding its face from me. I immediately thought it was someone trying to break in. So I started screaming, and we called the emergency services. The police came and brought us outside to show us that there were absolutely no footprints in the snow whatsoever around my window. Not to mention, my window is far too high for someone to be face level with it without a ladder or a chair. So what else could it be other than paranormal? I know what I saw. I stared this thing down for at least 10 to 15 seconds as I was frozen with fear. My mom called her First Nation friend, who was going to come and smudge our house in a few days for us. But other than that, I do not know what else to do. I am terrified, constantly looking over my shoulder and having to look out my window to make sure nothing else happens out there. If anyone has any advice or idea of what is happening, please help. I know this sounds crazy, but it is the truth. A number of years ago, my boyfriend and I went on holiday to Mexico. We were exploring the ancient pyramids on one of our tours, marveling at the historical grandeur. As we were getting back to our hotel, my boyfriend subtly pulled me to the side, away from the tour guide and the rest of the group, and showed me something he had tucked away in his pocket. He'd been itching to tell me for a while, and I had indeed noticed him acting a little funny, distracted. That is when he pulled out a small rock. I glanced at it without much interest, ready to go back to listening to the tour guide, when he pulled me over again, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, I got this from the ruins." I gave him a puzzled look. "Why would you do that?" I asked, a hint of concern in my voice. He simply said, "I thought it was really cool to have a piece of history with us forever. We can put it in our house." I gave him a faint smile. I was not really sure why he decided to take a random rock home, but I did not think it was such a terrible thing. Anyway, that night, I had the worst dreams I have ever experienced. I dreamt that I was seeing my closest friend, Abby, with only one arm. She was trying desperately to tell me something, but it was as if she was underwater, her voice muffled, frantically waving her remaining arm and her stump. I woke up in a cold sweat, completely freaked out. I called her up back home, but she was still asleep, as I expected. I tried going back to sleep, but there was a deep-rooted sense of fear in my gut, an intense unease that was preventing me from sleeping with ease. I tossed and turned for a while, and then my boyfriend gently poked me in the side. I instantly turned and asked him what was wrong. He said he had had a horrible dream, one where my friend Abby only had one arm. This freaked me out a little, then a lot. I had not said anything out loud about my dream, not even when I had attempted to call her. I had not left a voicemail or a message of any kind. There was simply no way he could have known or heard me. I tried to brush this off as a simple coincidence, but for the next 3 nights, I did not sleep well. A general feeling of unease constantly overcame me. We had a few days left of the holiday still. One afternoon, as I was sitting up in our room, waiting for room service as I was not feeling entirely well, I distinctly saw a shadow. It was about half the size of a normal person, and it darted swiftly from our bed to the bathroom. I was reading a book at the time, and I just about felt my heart stop. I did not move, feeling completely vulnerable, paralyzed by what I had seen. I just stared at the corner where it had vanished, towards the bathroom, listening and waiting. Minutes passed, and with immense trepidation, I slowly scooped myself off the bed and looked past the corner. There was nothing there, no one to be alarmed about, and I started to get truly scared. That is when I saw the rock, the one my boyfriend had taken from the ruins. It was sitting on the glass table in front of the television, and a chilling thought struck me. All of this had started when he brought the rock. Could it be connected? I went downstairs to rejoin my boyfriend a little while later and began to speak to him about the rock. I asked him what had made him want to bring it. He confessed he just thought it was cool and would be something fun to show his friends back home. I gave him a dismissive sound and went to speak with the bartender, ordering another drink. We struck up a conversation, and I subtly steered it towards local culture and history, and then finally towards the ruins. I wanted to be careful, not to directly accuse. Then I casually mentioned that I had heard of people who took objects from ruins, like rocks and things. His demeanor completely changed from the happy, pleasant tone we had been conversing in prior. He looked at me, his expression serious, and said, "Did you take something from the ruins?" "No," I said, lying through my teeth, my heart pounding. Good, he replied. They say that those who take from the sacred sites are haunted by a Lucius. I asked him what this funny word meant. He explained that in Mexican culture, these are tiny, dwarf-like spirit things that can drag your soul to the ground and kill you if you are not careful. He emphasized that they are not to be trifled with. I understood them to be somewhere between a ghost and a boogeyman, but I took his warning very heavily, especially as I had seen something half the size of a man just earlier that day. I told my boyfriend later that evening that I was having serious misgivings about him having taken the rock. I managed to convince him that the best thing to do would be to return it. So, he begrudgingly agreed. We took the same tour again, albeit with a different tour company to avoid suspicion, and he returned the rock exactly where he had found it. I am happy to say, the rest of our vacation was completely spirit-free, and the persistent feeling of unease lifted entirely. Whether the feeling was entirely in my mind or not is another matter. But I know, with undeniable certainty, that I saw that shadow dart from our bed to the bathroom. And it is something I will never forget. Do not go pilfering sacred sites, people. You never know if you might bring more home with you than you expected. This period of my life started out as something very positive, a new beginning. But it quickly spiraled into one of the darkest periods of my life, and the whole thing now feels like a blur in my memory. I had started dating this girl who absolutely loved a particular paranormal television show. She even had a pentagram tattoo on her, though, oddly, she did not even know what a pentagram was when I first met her. It was simply a symbol from the show that looked very similar. Things were great between us at first. I secured a job at a warehouse, working the night shift, and shortly after, I was able to find a cheap 3-bedroom apartment in the city. I loved the apartment, and I loved her. Our relationship, at first, was thriving. So, I got the rental agreement signed, and we began to move in. I had 2 beagles, and I had just brought in their little dishes that they eat and drink out of. I set them down on the kitchen table, and immediately, before my very eyes, the dish flew off the table. I did not know what to make of it, so I just tried to let it go. It freaked us out, but her more than me, because honestly, I did not really believe in ghosts until I lived in that apartment. I knew strange things could happen, but I just thought there must be some other, more logical explanation. The first major incident I can recall involved a brand new towel cabinet in the bathroom. I had just washed about 10 towels and neatly placed them in this cabinet. Now, keep in mind, this cabinet smelled of fresh wood, and my towels smelled of fresh laundry. Well, the very next day, that cabinet was completely saturated with the smell of death or rot, an unbearable, pungent odor. It deeply unnerved us, but again, I was not jumping to conclusions. Anything, I reasoned, could have been the cause of the smell. The strange thing was, the smell was completely isolated to the cabinet. I took out my towels and re-washed them. The next day, the smell was entirely gone. It seemed to me, at the time, like an animal might have died in the wall, and the smell just would not go away. At this point, we had heard from our upstairs neighbor that the place was haunted. Apparently, a 7-foot-tall shadow man in a hat had been seen there. Our neighbor's friends had apparently seen it, and due to their profound fear, would no longer come down to our house. Whatever this entity was, it seemed to have a strange obsession with my dogs, and the dog's food bowl in particular. So, one night, I was at work. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I received a frantic phone call from my girlfriend. She did not work and spent her days and nights at home, so she experienced most of this firsthand. She was in tears, so scared she could barely get the words out. Honestly, it still makes me feel the same type of profound fear remembering how terrified she sounded. She was in the living room, which was a large, open space, essentially half the apartment, connected to the kitchen, which comprised the other half. She was chilling with the dogs on the couch when she heard a distinct sound in the kitchen. My dog, Scout, immediately perked up and started growling, staring intently into the kitchen as if there were an intruder. My girlfriend looked, and before her very eyes, the dog dish in the kitchen very slowly began to slide across the kitchen floor. She basically went into shock from the fear, but managed to calm me. I came home and did what I could, which was basically nothing. I simply put the dog bowl back in its spot and then went back to work. 10 minutes later, I received another call. The dish had moved again. Her mother came and picked her up, and she spent the night away from the house. The sun was up by the time I got home, and the house always felt safer when the sun was out, so I just went to sleep. The front patio light started going on and off by itself, inexplicably. It was creepy, but again, nothing too crazy in my mind. My one dog seemed to never notice the entity, but my other dog would always have this terrified expression on her face and would behave as if another, unseen person were in the house. The upstairs neighbor was going through her attic and found some strange note in the prior tenant's belongings that said, "Madame is God." I looked up the name, and it turned out that it was some ancient Babylonian deity. I then brought up to the landlady that the place was haunted, and she, without hesitation, confirmed it. "Cool," I thought sarcastically. "Thanks for telling me that after I moved in." Shortly after, my ex-girlfriend started hearing disembodied voices. A man whispering in her ear from directly behind her when she was in the bathroom. My voice calling to her when I was actually asleep. Her toys would run away and footsteps would be heard moving around the house. Tables would flip over in the living room in the middle of the night, causing me to storm out of my bedroom, ready to confront some burglar, only to find nothing but an overturned table. Whatever this thing was, it was horribly negative. This was not just some ordinary haunting where a ghost is doing random things. It had a mind, and it seemed to be doing things that specifically caused stress and negativity to take hold in my relationship. When things were good at home, the paranormal activity would noticeably increase, as if trying to cause problems. And then, when things got bad for us, it would go dormant, as if it had achieved its goal. It felt like it always had to keep everyone in the house at each other's throats. From the very first moment I moved in there, a moment did not pass where it did not feel like some unseen person was staring at me intensely. I just always got that sensation, and it was deeply unnerving. So then, the nightmares and scratches started for me. Every single night, I would experience horrible, terrifying night terrors. Violent dreams filled with people I loved dying, and people in general being gravely hurt. I would wake up with long red scratches all over my body, marks that I could not explain, and would constantly wake up pouring sweat and calling out because the dreams were so intense. I honestly cannot remember the last time I had a nightmare before I moved into this place. And thankfully, now that I have moved out, the nightmares have completely stopped. Fast forward a little bit, and I had a very important meeting for work that I absolutely could not miss. I planned to leave an hour earlier than necessary, just to be safe and account for any unforeseen delays. Except, when I went to leave, my keys had vanished. I looked for them everywhere, searching frantically, and it started to get closer to my shift start time. I was panicking. I never lose my keys, and at this point, I was literally ripping the place apart. I tore the cushions off the couch, searched under everything, but I could not find them. I left the apartment a bit of a mess in my desperation and had to get my neighbor to drive me to work. When she later went into my apartment to clean up a bit, she picked up the cushions, put them back on the couch, and then went to the bathroom. When she came out, she heard a distinct sound. She went to investigate and found my keys neatly placed in the center of the couch cushion, the very cushion she had just put back into place. It was utterly unreal. This told me that whatever this thing was, it was calculating. At this point, I knew it was actually trying to harm me. If I did not make it to work, I would have lost my job. And it had somehow chosen this one day of all days to make my keys disappear. It was an unreal, malicious act. Now, I want to mention this because it fits the whole trend of the house attracting and fueling negative energy. The upstairs neighbor was this young woman, not a bad person herself, but she had this deadbeat boyfriend who never worked. And pretty much just laid around, doing drugs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and mooching off her. Years ago, this guy had tragically ended someone's life over the last hit of acid. It was ruled as manslaughter, and he served his time and was released. A week after we moved in, my girlfriend caught him clearly peeping through our window at her. So, it turned out that my neighbor on his left, his family owned the house he was in, the house we were in, and the house to the right. Apparently, all three of those houses were haunted. So, to make a long story short, my relationship with my girlfriend spiraled completely out of control. She eventually left me. It had become toxic, and in hindsight, it was truly for the best. I do not blame her for anything. I have to accept that I messed things up, but that house, that oppressive, negative house, added that last bit of stress on top of the real-life stresses that pushed everything over the edge. I truly believe the entity fueled the flames when things were good between us, subtly causing discord, and then would go dormant when things were bad, as if it had achieved its purpose of causing chaos. There really is a lot more to tell you about that place, but in all, it certainly was not a good place to live. The lingering fear and the vivid memories of what occurred there still weigh heavily on my mind. My new life in the enchanting city of Prague, in the Czech Republic, began with such optimism. I had decided to leave my home country of Belgium, seeking new opportunities as a private teacher after realizing that the labor market for recent graduates there was far from ideal. My girlfriend and I found an apartment that seemed perfect, nestled in a charming district not far from the majestic Prague Castle. It was a duplex, occupying the very last floor of an old building, one that must have stood for at least 80 or even 100 years, its stones steeped in history. Yet, our particular apartment, despite its venerable shell, had only been inhabited for a mere 2 decades. This was because it used to be the building's expansive attic, transformed into a contemporary living space. For 5 months, we had lived there, enjoying its bright, modern interior, finding nothing to be scared of. It felt like a safe sunlit haven high above the bustling streets. Then, last month, a student of mine, a lovely young woman, asked if I would be willing to keep her dog, a charming fox terrier, for 3 weeks while she was out of the country. I adore dogs, their loyal companionship and playful spirits, but living on the 6th floor of a building without any elevators is, frankly, a deal breaker for owning one permanently. The thought of all those stairs, day in and day out, was simply too much. Despite this, I agreed, eager to help my student and enjoy the temporary company of a furry friend. The very first night the dog stayed with us was terrible. The poor creature could not stop whining, a mournful, persistent sound that echoed through the quiet apartment. It was so used to sleeping in the same bed as its owner, and the unfamiliar couch downstairs was clearly unsettling for it. In all honesty, mostly for the sake of my girlfriend, who needed to get some sleep, and to try and reassure the distressed dog, I made the decision to go down and sleep on the L-shaped couch in the living room. The dog, sensing my proximity, became completely silent for the rest of the night. I drifted into an uneasy sleep, disturbed only by the unfamiliar surroundings. I awoke in the early hours of the morning, somewhere between 6 and 7 o'clock. My eyes were still heavy with sleep, but my ears picked up a distinct sound, the gentle creaking of wooden stairs, followed by light, soft footsteps. I immediately thought it was my girlfriend walking down the wooden staircase. coming to check on me, or simply starting her day early. I heard the light steps moving towards the couch where I lay. I was only half awake, in that blurry state between sleep and consciousness, but frankly, I felt it was too early to show that I was awake and initiated conversation. I simply lay still, listening. That is when I felt her. A distinct pressure settled onto the couch, as if someone was sitting down directly beside me. And then a gentle leaning sensation, as if she was resting her weight against me. The warmth of a body was palpable next to mine. I decided it was time to turn around and offer a sleepy kiss. Hello. I was lying on the smaller part of the L-shaped sofa, so turning was an easy, natural movement. But when I turned, my eyes blinking open fully, there was nothing. No one. The space beside me was empty, the cushion uncreased. I listened intently, my heart beginning to quicken, and I could clearly hear my girlfriend upstairs, gently snoring, a soft, rhythmic sound echoing from above. Obviously, I freaked out. I have a history of sleep paralysis, a terrifying condition where your mind wakes up, but your body remains frozen, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations. I hate it when it happens, a profound sense of helplessness and fear. So, for the rest of that day, I tried to convince myself that this was it. Just another episode of sleep paralysis, a vivid waking nightmare. I hated it, but at least I could rationalize it. It was nothing hostile, merely a glitch in my own brain. A few days later, my mom and my cousin came to visit us in Prague, eager to spend the Christmas holiday together. They too slept on the same L-shaped sofa downstairs. I was genuinely happy about this arrangement because it meant the dog would no longer whine at night, as it was not alone downstairs. After their very first night in the apartment, we woke up, and my mom casually asked, "Who went to the toilet in the early morning?" I immediately replied that I had not, and my girlfriend, as far as she could recall, had not either. My mom then proceeded to tell me that in the early morning at around 6 or 7 o'clock, she had clearly heard one of us go down the stairs, walk towards the bathroom, which is located after the corridor between the couch and the apartment entrance, and then stop for a few seconds directly in front of the couch where she lay. She said she felt an undeniable sensation of being watched, just like I had experienced. But she too had felt it was a bit early to wake up and start a conversation. It was only after we told her about my identical first experience that she became visibly pale, her face drained of color. And she asked if we were pulling her leg, playing a cruel joke. We were not. The shared, inexplicable experience solidified a chilling truth between us. A few more days passed, and my mom and cousin returned to Belgium, their holiday ending. My girlfriend then left for France to celebrate her mother's 50th birthday, leaving me completely alone in the apartment. Because I did not feel particularly courageous about being home alone after these recent, unsettling experiences, I decided to let the dog come up with me and sleep in my room upstairs. I was desperate for some living, breathing company in the quiet apartment. 2 nights ago, I was sleeping on my stomach. The dog nestled comfortably by my side. Again, in the early morning hours, I heard something. It sounded like someone either sighing softly or laughing lightly, a breathy, almost playful sound. My first thought was that it must have been another sleep hallucination, a product of my tired mind. But then, the dog suddenly got up, its ears perked forward, every fiber of its being straining, as if trying to hear where the noise was coming from. The dog kept looking intensely into the void, towards the direction where I thought the noise had come from just a few seconds prior, its focus unnerving. Its posture, its stillness, its undeniable reaction, confirmed that I was not alone in what I had heard. The dog has now returned to its family. Its 3 weeks of temporary residence concluded, and I am completely home alone until Saturday. I have never, in my entire life, wanted my girlfriend to be back more than I do now. The modern, bright attic apartment, once a comforting haven, now feels like a place of constant unease, where unseen presences linger in the quiet, and strange sounds echo from empty spaces. The sense of being watched, the chilling echoes of shared experiences, have transformed my perception of this once ordinary home into something far more unsettling. The thought of these old walls, once an attic, now holding a silent, watchful presence, sends shivers down my spine. The vastness of the empty apartment, the long journey up those stairs, now feels like a solitary vigil against an invisible inhabitant. I find myself constantly listening, straining for sounds that may or may not be there, jumping at every creak of the old building settling around me. Sleep is a battle, often punctuated by sudden awakenings, my heart hammering in my chest as I scan the darkness for anything out of place. The light from the city below, once a comforting glow, now feels distant and detached from the unsettling quiet within these walls. This place, my supposedly safe and modern home, has revealed a hidden, chilling layer of existence, a silent resident from the old building's past that now shares my space. I am a skeptic by nature, one of those people who needs to see something with my own eyes, to touch it, to truly believe. Yet, even I have found myself utterly confounded by certain events, experiences that defy all logical explanation. This particular tale comes from my brother, John, and his coworker, Chris. We all work for a non-profit organization dedicated to helping individuals with mental and physical disabilities live fulfilling and meaningful lives. My brother, John, works at a different house than I do, one that specifically houses young children, 4 of them, if I recall correctly. Chris, his co-worker, was the primary witness to the chilling events that unfolded there. Chris's story begins during a graveyard shift, the quiet, unsettling hours between midnight and dawn. He was working with an older, middle-aged woman, his sole companion in the large sleeping house. The building itself was equipped with security alarms on every door and window, a necessary precaution to alert staff if any of the children, who sometimes had a tendency to wander, tried to leave when they should have been safely inside. Chris was downstairs in the small, functional office, diligently completing some paperwork. His co-worker, meanwhile, was upstairs, tidying up after the evening's activities. Suddenly, without warning, every single alarm in the house shrieked to life. Every door, every window signaled a breach. The cacophony was deafening, jolting Chris from his quiet concentration. His first thought, an immediate and panicked assumption, was that the clients were staging a mass breakout, a coordinated attempt to escape, as he would later jokingly refer to it. He sprang from his chair, adrenaline coursing through his veins, and yelled to his coworker to head out one door while he rushed out the other, frantically searching for whoever was outside. He burst into the cool night air, his eyes scanning the property. He spotted one of the clients standing beneath a large, ancient tree in the backyard. The child, named Barry, was not, however, in any apparent hurry, standing perfectly still, seemingly unconcerned by the blaring alarms. Chris thought he recognized Barry, a familiar face from his shifts. "Barry," he called out, his voice tinged with urgency. "Head back inside." Or something to that effect. He couldn't quite recall the exact words in his panic. He continued his frantic search for the other clients, circling the house, checking every shadow and corner. But after running around in a desperate, panicked search, he found absolutely no one else. Finally, bewildered and exhausted, he gave up and headed back inside to reconvene with his coworker, hoping she had had more success. He told her, slightly out of breath, that he had found Barry, but no one else. Her response stunned him into silence. She revealed, with a calm that belied the recent chaos, that everyone was still inside, having never left the house at all, including Barry. Chris insisted she must be mistaken. "No, I saw him," he asserted. "He was outside, by that big tree in the backyard." His co-worker's face, however, was etched with a profound fear as he insisted on his observation. She explained that what he had seen was, in fact, what the staff of the house often referred to as white dress, a ghostly woman said to reside on the property. This spectral figure was often seen wearing all white and, chillingly, was frequently observed standing beneath that very tree. Needless to say, Chris was completely taken aback, surprised, confused, and definitely unnerved by this revelation. But the story, as he recounted it, did not end there. Sometime later, a client from another group home, a young man named Kieran, whom Chris was very close to, sadly passed away. Kieran had been sick for a while, and Chris was present for his final breaths in the hospital, a moment that deeply affected him. Kieran had been wheelchair-bound during his life, a constant companion to his daily movements. Later, a client at the very same house where Chris had seen the white dress needed a wheelchair temporarily while recovering from a slip and fall accident. The staff, coincidentally, brought the very wheelchair that used to belong to Kieran to the house. Immediately, Barry, the nonverbal client Chris had seen under the tree, began to fixate on the wheelchair. When it was not in use, Barry would take it for his own enjoyment, an inexplicable obsession. Staff members quickly took note of this peculiar attachment and could not explain why he loved it so much. Barry would frequently take the empty wheelchair outside to a small hill on the property, push it down the slope, then retrieve it and return it to the top, repeating this strange ritual over and over again. Barry is nonverbal, meaning he cannot speak using spoken language, but he does understand speech and communicates effectively using gestures. One particularly useful gesture involved him selecting the staff member's left or right hand in a sort of this or that conversation. For example, a staff member could hold out their hands and say, "Barry, do you want tacos for dinner tonight?" identifying that as the left-hand option, or "Do you want burgers for dinner tonight?" as the right-hand option, and Barry would then choose by touching the correct hand. He also had a distinctive tic where he would hold his palm very close to his face and sort of mumble into it. This, Chris realized later, was actually what he thought he saw when the white dress was under the tree that night. He had mistaken the shadowy figure for Barry, engaged in this familiar gesture. This tic was important because Barry would often do this gesture, mumbling into his hand, when he played with Kieran's wheelchair. Staff members grew curious. They wondered if they might be able to determine who Barry was speaking to when he was engaged in his solitary play with the wheelchair. They decided to pose a sequence of this and that questions using fake names. "Barry, who was in the wheelchair? Is it Michael or Emily?" No response. "Is it James or Samuel?" Again, no response. "Is it Stephanie or Teresa?" Still no response. They did this a few times, running through various common names, before casually dropping in the real name. "Is it Kieran or Jean?" Right away, without hesitation, Barry selected the correct hand. Everyone present was utterly shocked. According to Chris, he was the only real link between Kieran and this house. Barry and Kieran had never known each other, and Chris was certain that no one had ever spoken of the previous owner of the wheelchair to Barry. He simply could not explain how Barry knew Kieran's name. This story, however, still does not end there. For reasons unknown to me, Chris decided to take Kieran's wheelchair home with him for a while. Perhaps it was a keepsake, a memento of a client he had cared for deeply. He brought it to his large house, which he rented out with his brother, John, their girlfriends, and 2 other individuals. Soon after the wheelchair arrived, strange things began to happen around their own home. One day, everyone was out of the house except for John and Chris's girlfriend. Both of them later claimed that the door to Chris's bedroom suddenly slammed shut with far too much force and noise to be explained by mere wind, and especially since no windows in his bedroom were open at the time. This incident, they both asserted, happened a few times, while the wheelchair was present in the house, which becomes even more interesting when you consider that Kieran, the former occupant of the wheelchair, would often get Chris's attention by deliberately slamming doors when he was alive. John also mentioned that other strange things had occurred once the wheelchair arrived, but I am a bit hazy on the specific details. I do know he claimed to have once heard someone calling his name, clear as a bell, but no one else was home at the time. As I said, both Chris and John consider themselves skeptics, even after these experiences. They agree that these events are all undeniably strange, but ultimately, they remain unconvinced that it is solid proof of the paranormal. I too am what I call a hopeful skeptic. I would dearly love for any of the paranormal subjects in the world to be definitively verified, to be proven true, but I suppose I need to see it myself, unequivocally, to truly believe. John summarized his feelings well by saying, "I'm not saying it was a ghost. I'm just saying weird things would happen while we had the wheelchair here, and they stopped when the wheelchair left. I have asked about the current whereabouts of this wheelchair, but I forget what they said. Either they do not know, or it is now somewhere else within the company where Chris no longer visits. If I can ever get hold of it, I would love to ask for more details." I often wonder what others might think about these stories, specifically what John referred to as anchor points. The wheelchair was present when Kieran died, and apparently, some people believe that souls, which I personally do not believe in, can attach themselves to physical objects of great importance from a person's life. This logic, however, still does not quite make sense to me, even if I suspend my disbelief and allow myself to consider the possibility of ghosts. What makes me believe these ghosts can attach themselves to objects? Is it the same logic that makes people believe ghosts haunt certain areas, homes, vehicles, or even specific rooms? I am simply dying to be convinced, to find that undeniable proof. And I always love hearing more stories, reading theories, and learning about this topic. Finally, I would like to mention something else John told me. He also has videos, or at least he used to, of the chair moving by itself on flat ground. The video was unfortunately deleted from his phone, but he hopes his coworker still has a copy. He also clarified that he never really attributed these strange events to the chair until much later, when he overheard other staff members speculating that there might be a cursed object in the house. That is when he put all the pieces together. Lastly, he added that another boy at the house, a client, was also able to describe the white dress, and this boy also frequently played with Kieran's wheelchair. The details get a bit confusing because the white dress stories and the wheelchair stories are typically separate phenomena. But Chris noted that all the activities seemed to be amplified, to become more frequent and intense once the chair arrived at the house. He also told me of an incident where the wheelchair was rolling down hills and slamming doors. And it was particularly strange to him because those were the exact things that Kieran, the wheelchair's former owner, loved to do the most while he was alive. It was as if Kieran, through the chair, was still present, still interacting with the world in his own unique, unsettling way.